The clink of the door chime was barely audible over the hum of chatter in the diner, but it was enough to make Sarah look up from the coffee pot she was refilling. At first, she thought it was just another customer, someone escaping the cold Minnesota winter, looking for a hot meal and a warm drink. But when she saw him standing there, just inside the door, her heart skipped a beat. Elon Musk. The name was as familiar as the snowflakes drifting outside, but seeing him in person, standing right there in her small-town diner, was something else entirely. "Is that Elon Musk?" Sarah whispered, her voice almost lost in the din of the morning rush. She glanced around the room, looking for some sign that others had noticed the billionaire tech mogul. The older couple at the booth didn't seem to have registered the event. The trucker at the counter kept stirring his coffee, blissfully unaware. But Sarah couldn't look away. She was staring at a man who had changed the world, a man who could easily have been anywhere but here, in her diner, on the edge of nowhere. The diner was nothing special, not by a long shot. Its linoleum floors, worn from decades of use, seemed to hold the memories of hundreds of regulars who'd come and gone. The walls were decorated with faded pictures of the local football team and the occasional "Welcome to Minnesota" sign. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and no one was ever a stranger for long. It wasn't the kind of place a billionaire like Elon Musk would visit. At least, that was what Sarah thought. "Excuse me, miss." The voice broke her out of her trance. It was deep, calm, unmistakable. She turned, her heart racing. Elon Musk. He was standing by the counter now, looking at the menu with an air of casual indifference, as though it were just another place he was passing through on a regular day. He wasn't wearing the usual suit or sharp clothes she'd seen in the countless interviews online. Instead, he was dressed in a simple jacket, jeans, and sneakers, dressed like someone who could have been any average Joe walking into a small-town diner. "Can I get a coffee?" he asked, flashing a quick smile. Sarah blinked. She wasn't sure if her mind had momentarily lost its grip on reality, or if she was still caught in some kind of fever dream. But there he was, the real Elon Musk, standing in front of her. For a moment, she was speechless. Was this some kind of publicity stunt? Maybe he was just passing through, on his way to something more important. Yeah, coffee. Sure, she managed, forcing the words out. Coming right up. As she poured the coffee into the cup, she could feel her hands trembling. Her mind raced through all the possible reasons a man like Elon Musk would be in a place like this. He had to be here for something important, right? A new business venture? A partnership? Or was this some kind of odd coincidence? He took the coffee from her with a polite nod and sat down at the counter. The rest of the diner seemed oblivious to the presence of the man who had made headlines with his ambitious projects, SpaceX, Tesla, and even the Boring Company. It was as though no one had realized that one of the most influential people in the world had just entered their lives. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something big was happening. She glanced at the clock, 8:42 a.m. The usual crowd of regulars was in, but the atmosphere was different now. Tense, almost. She couldn't help herself. She leaned against the counter and stole another glance at him. His head was down as he flipped through his phone, no doubt catching up on emails. But there was a sense of quiet confidence about him, like he knew exactly what was going to happen next. Why here? Why now? The question burned in Sarah's mind. Why would Elon Musk, of all people, walk into a run-of-the-mill diner in the middle of Minnesota? Was it just coincidence? Or was there something more to it? She shook her head, trying to focus. It was just a random occurrence, she told herself. There was no reason to get worked up. But that wasn't true. This wasn't random. Nothing about this felt random. She watched as Elon pulled his coffee cup to his lips, took a slow sip, and looked out the window, seemingly deep in thought. The entire room had quieted as though the other patrons, too, could sense the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just a meeting of minds or a celebrity sighting. It was the beginning of something. Something that would change everything. Sarah swallowed hard and set her jaw. Her mind raced with questions. What would happen if she spoke to him? If she took this opportunity to ask him about his plans? What if this encounter turned into something bigger? A chance of a lifetime, maybe. The regulars around her continued their quiet conversations, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was witnessing history unfold in front of her. She had no idea why Elon Musk was here, but she knew it was important. And if she played her cards right, this could be the moment that changed her life forever. She wasn't going to let it slip by without knowing why he was here. As Sarah wiped down the counter and tried to compose herself, she suddenly realized that she had the opportunity to do something. She could approach him, start a conversation, ask questions. This could be her chance. But then the other part of her, self-doubt, fear, held her back. What if he wasn't interested? What if he thought she was just some small-town waitress who didn't belong in his world? But then, there was that other voice, bold, daring, telling her that this was the moment to act, that this was the shot she'd been waiting for her whole life. Maybe I should just go for it, Sarah thought. And then it happened. Without another moment's hesitation, Sarah walked over to Elon's table. This was it, the moment that could change everything. As Sarah approached the counter, her heart pounded in her chest. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had worked in this diner for 5 years, and while it wasn't glamorous, it was familiar. The regulars knew her by name, and she knew theirs. There was something comfortable about the rhythm of her days, coffee refills, the constant buzz of conversation, the clink of silverware against plates. Nothing extraordinary ever happened here, but it was her world, and she was okay with that. But today, everything was different. Elon Musk, the man whose name everyone seemed to know, sat in front of her like any other customer. As she stood there, a moment of doubt crept in. Who was she to interrupt him? But then she remembered the countless days she had spent behind the counter, listening to the stories of people from all walks of life. No one here was ever too important to say hello. Sarah had made a habit of treating everyone equally, from the local mayor to the young couple trying to figure out their life plans. She wasn't about to let that change just because the man in front of her could buy the whole town if he wanted to. "Hi," Sarah finally said, her voice breaking through the silence that had fallen between them. "Is everything okay with your coffee?" Elon looked up from his phone, his eyes sharp and focused. But then, as if realizing the weight of the moment, his expression softened. A small smile tugged at his lips. "Perfect. Thanks," he said in that unmistakable voice of his, calm, but with a certain undertone of authority that was hard to ignore. "I'm sorry to bother you." Sarah was about to respond when something in his eyes caught her off guard. There was a weariness there, something deeper than just the usual hustle and bustle of a billionaire's life. It was as though, for a brief moment, he wasn't just the tech mogul everyone admired from a distance. He was a person, like her, looking for something, or perhaps running from something. The realization made Sarah pause. "I don't think I've seen you around here before," Sarah said, her curiosity slipping out before she could stop it. Elon looked around the diner as though seeing it for the first time, though the building seemed as familiar to him as any other roadside eatery in the Midwest. His gaze flickered briefly to the faded photos on the wall, the worn wooden booths, the couple sitting in the corner booth, quietly laughing over pancakes. "First time for everything, I guess," he said, his voice carrying a faint chuckle, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He didn't seem like the type of person to take a detour into the quiet corners of America, let alone a tiny town like this one. But there he was, sitting before her, casually sipping coffee as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The conversation lulled for a moment, the gap between them suddenly feeling vast. Sarah's mind raced, struggling to understand why he was here. Could he just be passing through? Or was there something more? But who was she to ask? The idea of prying into his life felt absurd. But then again, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that there was something significant about this moment, about this unexpected encounter. She glanced at the clock above the counter, 9 a.m. The morning rush was slowing down. The trucker who'd been sitting at the counter with his empty mug had just paid and left, and the couple in the corner booth was finishing their meal. It was a lull in the action, and Sarah knew she would be on her own for a few minutes. It was now or never. "How long are you in town for?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Elon raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the question. "I wasn't planning on staying long, but who knows?" He paused, glancing out the window as if searching for an answer in the bleak Minnesota winter sky. Sometimes the road takes you places you didn't expect to go. Sarah took a step closer, her curiosity getting the better of her. I know the feeling, she said quietly, though she wasn't sure why she said it. It wasn't like her to open up to strangers, let alone someone like him. He looked back at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though sizing her up. Sarah stood her ground, not backing away. You've probably never met someone like me before, Elon said, his voice quieter now, almost introspective. Sarah tilted her head, puzzled. I don't know. You'd be surprised at who walks through the door here. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then, to Sarah's surprise, Elon smiled, a genuine smile, one that seemed to shed the aura of business mogul and reveal a more human side. He set his coffee cup down gently, his fingers lingering on the edge for a second. You're probably right, he said. Everyone's got a story. I guess that's why I like places like this. No one's ever too busy to tell theirs. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest, an unexpected connection with the man who had been a stranger just moments ago. He wasn't the unapproachable billionaire that everyone talked about. There was something more to him, something that intrigued her, that made her want to know more. Everyone's got a story, Sarah echoed, her voice soft. I don't know how much of a story I've got, but I've got a few good ones. You might be surprised. For the first time since he'd walked in, Elon seemed genuinely interested. He leaned in, his curiosity piqued. Well, I'm all ears, he said. Maybe you've got a story that could teach me something. His tone was playful, but there was a sincerity to it that caught Sarah off guard. Sarah chuckled, feeling a wave of warmth rush through her. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders. She felt, for the first time in a long while, like she was talking to someone who truly wanted to listen. And that wasn't something she'd ever expected from someone like him. But Sarah wasn't just a waitress. She was someone with her own dreams, her own struggles. She wasn't about to let this chance slip away, not when she had a feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something bigger. So, Sarah began, her voice gaining strength, you want to hear a story? The warmth of the diner, the soft clink of the coffee cups, and the hum of the aging jukebox seemed to fade away as Sarah found herself caught up in a conversation with Elon Musk. For a moment, the world outside the diner, cold, gray, and dreary, felt distant. And here, it was just her and this enigmatic man who had, somehow, walked into her life like a stranger, yet in some inexplicable way, felt oddly familiar. You really want to hear a story? Sarah asked, leaning against the counter, her eyes still locked on his. Elon smiled again, but this time, there was something different about it. A genuine curiosity, perhaps even a challenge. I'm all ears, Sarah. You've got my attention. It was odd to hear him say her name, like they had known each other for years, yet this was the first time they had spoken. But Sarah didn't dwell on that. She didn't have time. She was about to tell her story, her real story. The one that no one ever asked about, the one she kept buried for so long. All right, she said, setting the coffee pot down on the counter. Here goes. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She hadn't talked about this to anyone in ages. Her mother's passing, the years spent trying to make a life for herself in this tiny town, away from the promises of something bigger. She had always dreamed of leaving, of doing something grander, but life had a way of changing those plans. Now, she found herself tethered here, to this place, this job, and the simple, quiet life that came with it. I wasn't always a waitress here, you know, she began. Elon's gaze never left her face, and she could see the hint of intrigue in his eyes. I grew up in a small town. Nothing like this one, though. We had more opportunities, I guess. But things weren't perfect. My parents tried their best, but life didn't give us much to work with. They worked long hours at a factory, and I spent a lot of time on my own. She paused, the memories flooding back. Her childhood had been far from the dream she once hoped for. When she was young, she'd imagined leaving the small-town life behind and becoming someone important. She'd been good in school, had big plans to go to college, even had a scholarship lined up. But everything had changed when her mother died suddenly from an illness that no one saw coming. Her father, unable to cope with the loss, turned to alcohol, and the family's future crumbled with each passing day. I had dreams of going to college, Sarah continued, her voice softer now. I even had a scholarship to go to the University of Minnesota. But after Mom died, everything changed. I had to stay home, help my dad with the house, and eventually, I ended up here, working as a waitress. Elon didn't interrupt, but she could tell that he was processing the story, the weight of it settling between them. You know, I had this idea when I was younger that success was something you could measure. Money, fame, power. Those were the things that mattered. I thought if I had those things, my life would be different. But now, it feels like all those dreams were just distractions, Sarah said, her voice trailing off as she reflected on her own journey. Elon nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. I get that. I think we all go through moments when we question what success really means, he said. There was a vulnerability in his tone that caught Sarah off guard. She had always seen him as this larger-than-life figure, a man whose life was in the spotlight, whose success seemed unshakable. But hearing him speak like this, it made her wonder if, in some ways, they were more alike than she'd thought. Before Sarah could respond, the door to the diner opened, the chime of the bell snapping her back to reality. A gust of cold air swept into the diner, followed by a group of rowdy construction workers, their laughter filling the room as they made their way to the counter. Sarah glanced over her shoulder, momentarily distracted, but Elon's presence still loomed large in the room. The tension between them, the quiet understanding, hadn't dissipated. It had only grown stronger. But then, something shifted. As the group settled in and began to place their orders, Sarah noticed a subtle change in Elon. His posture seemed to stiffen, the lightness in his eyes faded, and his attention shifted from her to the commotion at the other end of the diner. For a split second, she wondered if she'd said something wrong, but then the answer came, not from words, but from the subtle shift in his body language. Elon Musk, the visionary, the man who had never seemed rattled by anything, was now on edge, and Sarah could feel it in the air between them. She caught his gaze again, this time a little more guarded. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice quiet, but the question was there, sharp and pointed. Elon hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the door as though something, or someone, had caught his attention. "I have a lot going on," he said, his voice low, almost distracted. "But this conversation has been nice. It's just, sometimes I forget what normal feels like." His words were quiet, but they felt like a window had just been opened into a deeper part of him, one he hadn't intended to show. Sarah was about to ask more when one of the construction workers, a tall man with a thick beard, got up from his seat and walked toward Elon. He didn't look like someone who would recognize a tech mogul. In fact, the way he approached suggested he had no idea who he was talking to. "Hey, you," the man said, slapping Elon on the shoulder as he passed. "You got a second? I've got a business proposition for you." His voice was rough, and he reeked of diesel fuel and sweat. "I could use a little advice." Elon froze for a moment, his jaw tightening. It wasn't an unfriendly gesture, but it was unexpected. The construction worker, clearly unaware of who he was talking to, leaned in as though Elon was just another businessman to be dealt with. For a brief moment, Sarah saw the facade crack. Elon wasn't just the billionaire genius who ran companies worth billions. He was a man, a person who had to navigate a world that constantly saw him as something more than human. And in that brief exchange, Sarah saw something in him she hadn't expected, a glimpse of loneliness, perhaps even frustration. Elon looked at the man, his eyes hardening, before he forced a smile. "I'm afraid I don't have time for that right now," he said, his tone clipped. But the worker didn't seem to take the hint. "Come on, man. I know you've got time. You always have time for a good idea, right?" A flicker of tension passed between them. Elon's eyes darkened, but just as quickly, he stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "No, I'm sorry. Maybe another time," he said, his voice no longer friendly. He grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair, clearly ready to leave. Sarah watched in stunned silence as Elon turned, walking toward the door without another word. She could feel the energy in the room shift as he left, the construction worker still standing there, puzzled. The group of regulars had stopped talking, all eyes following Elon's exit as the door chimed again. And just like that, Elon Musk, the man who had unexpectedly walked into her life, was gone. The silence in the diner was deafening. But in that silence, Sarah realized something had shifted. It wasn't just about the man who had left. It was about what had been left behind. The air outside the diner had turned colder as the evening approached, but Sarah barely noticed the chill. Her mind was still racing from the encounter with Elon Musk. Everything had happened so quickly, and yet it felt like it had been building up for years. The quiet rhythm of her life had been disrupted in an instant, and now, as the last remnants of daylight faded away, Sarah stood at the window, staring into the emptiness. Elon's sudden departure had left a hole in the air, a sense of unfinished business, of something that had begun but had not yet concluded. It felt like the opening of a chapter in her life that she couldn't quite make sense of. The diner was still bustling with the usual mix of customers, but the noise seemed distant, muffled by the events that had just transpired. She hadn't seen Elon leave, just the clink of the doorbell and the creak of the door as he stepped out. His figure had disappeared into the thickening twilight, and she hadn't moved to stop him. Part of her wanted to follow, to ask him where he was going, why he had come. But another part of her knew it was pointless. He was the kind of man who didn't let anyone into his world unless he chose to let them in. The waitress inside Sarah was used to making herself small, to staying in the background. But tonight, as she stood alone, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward something bigger than her quiet existence in the diner. There was something about Elon, something that felt both fragile and incredibly strong at the same time. In the brief moments of their conversation, she had glimpsed something real behind the polished image, something raw and human that mirrored her own struggles. And that was what kept her here, rooted to the spot. The diner was quieter now, with only a few stragglers left to finish their meals. Sarah walked back to the counter, wiping down the surface absent-mindedly. She hadn't thought about her own life like this in years, about her dreams, her future. Her fingers stilled on the counter as she heard the faint sound of the diner door opening again. She turned, half expecting to see Elon walk back in, but it wasn't him. Instead, it was one of the regulars, Jake, a local mechanic who had been coming to the diner every morning for as long as Sarah could remember. Jake, a burly man with a thick beard and broad shoulders, waved at her as he shuffled inside, shaking off the cold. He was one of the few people who seemed to know her story, and she couldn't help but feel a little more grounded in his presence. "Busy day, huh?" Jake said as he slid into the booth, his voice rough but friendly. "You could say that," Sarah replied, glancing over at him. "A lot of stuff happening today. More than usual, I guess." Jake raised an eyebrow, glancing at the empty seat across from her. "Something happened, Sarah? You look like you've seen a ghost." She chuckled dryly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Something like that. Just a weird encounter." Jake leaned back in his seat, his eyes narrowing. "Weird? You mean with the guy who came in earlier? The one who didn't look like he belonged?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "How did you?" Jake shrugged, taking off his jacket and slinging it over the back of the booth. "I know the regulars, Sarah. I've seen a lot of people come and go through this place, and that guy had outsider written all over him." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess he did. But he wasn't what I expected." Jake leaned forward, his voice low. "What do you mean? He wasn't what you expected? You mean he's not what the world says he is?" The way Jake spoke, so bluntly and with such quiet understanding, took Sarah by surprise. It was like he saw right through her, like he knew she had been carrying this weight, this fascination, with Elon Musk, and he wasn't going to let her avoid it. "Yeah, that's exactly it," Sarah said, her voice coming out almost like a confession. "I don't know why, but I've got this feeling. Like there's more to him than just what the media shows. More than all the headlines and the tweets. It's like he's lost." Jake watched her for a long moment, his gaze steady. "Well, you're not wrong. I've seen plenty of folks come through this place. Rich, poor, famous, forgotten. And the thing is, Most of them are just trying to figure it all out. Everyone's got a story, Sarah. Some just hide it better than others. The words hung in the air between them, settling into Sarah's chest like a weight. She had spent so long hiding her own story, burying her dreams beneath the routine of her life. But now, in this quiet moment, something inside her stirred. It was like Jake had said, everyone was just trying to figure it all out. Even Elon Musk. Even her. The feeling was unsettling, but it also made Sarah's heart race with the possibility of something more. Something beyond the life she had always known. Do you think? She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think people like him, people who have everything, still feel lost? Jake tilted his head, as though considering the question carefully. I think people like him are just as lost as anyone else, Sarah. They just don't show it the same way. The words lingered in the air, and Sarah found herself thinking about Elon's sudden departure, the way his guard had gone up when the construction worker had tried to approach him. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had misjudged him, if there was more to his visit than just an escape from the chaos of his life. And that thought of Elon being lost, just like her, made her wonder if, in some strange way, they were both on the same journey. Her heart pounded as the realization began to settle in. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just stuck in a life that didn't feel like her own anymore. She was capable of more, of reaching for something greater. And maybe, just maybe, Elon Musk was part of that bigger story, her story. But it wasn't just about him. It was about her, too. And with that, the journey she had been waiting for finally began to unfold. The next few days passed in a blur, as if Sarah had been sleepwalking through her routine. The diner was as busy as usual, with the usual mix of locals coming and going, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time the bell above the door jingled, she found herself half expecting Elon Musk to walk back in, as if he might have left something behind or was just taking a break before diving back into the whirlwind of his life. But he didn't come back. Instead, Sarah found herself thinking more and more about their conversation, about the things she had said to him, and about the way he had looked at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been left unsaid between them. It wasn't just about him. It was about her, about the direction her life had taken, about the choices she had made and the things she had given up. The conversations with Jake, her regular customers, even the sudden appearance of Elon in the diner, had begun to stir something deep inside her. A realization, a hunger, a need to break free from the routine, to stop hiding behind the counter and the apron, and to start living her life the way she had always dreamed. But how? She had tried to leave before, tried to pursue something bigger, something better, but life had always pulled her back. The death of her mother, the collapse of her family, the promises of a better future that had always seemed just out of reach. Sarah had settled into this life, resigned to the idea that maybe she wasn't meant for anything more. And yet, every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elon Musk's face. The way he had looked at her, the way he seemed to be searching for something, too. It was like a door had opened between them, a door that hadn't been there before. But that door was closing, and Sarah was left standing in front of it, unsure whether she had the courage to walk through. On a particularly cold Thursday afternoon, when the diner was nearly empty except for a few scattered patrons, Sarah found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. The wind outside howled, a reminder that winter had finally settled in. It wasn't snowing yet, but the frost was creeping in, painting the windows with a thin layer of ice. Then, just as she was about to turn away, the door opened with a loud chime. Sarah didn't even look up. She was too wrapped up in her thoughts to care about another customer. But then she heard a familiar voice, clear, confident, yet tinged with something else. Sarah. Her heart skipped a beat, and she turned toward the door. There, standing in the threshold, was Elon Musk. He wasn't dressed in his usual corporate attire, but in a more casual jacket and jeans, as though he had just decided to drop by without the world watching. He looked different somehow, less like the billionaire inventor and more like a man who was simply seeking something. For a moment, they just stared at each other, neither of them knowing what to say. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, a tension that had been building since their first encounter. Elon didn't smile this time. His expression was serious, almost contemplative. It was as if he had come here to make some kind of decision, but he wasn't sure if it was the right one. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a casual visit anymore. This was different. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She hadn't expected this. She had told herself that the encounter with him was a fluke, that he was just another transient figure in her life. But now, with him standing in front of her, she couldn't deny that something was changing, something that was bigger than both of them. She motioned to the counter, gesturing for him to sit. As Elon walked toward her, Sarah felt her heart race. Was he here to explain himself? To apologize for leaving so suddenly? Or was there something more to this meeting? The moment he sat down, Sarah quickly poured him a cup of coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she placed it in front of him. She didn't know what she was expecting, but she had a feeling it wasn't just another casual conversation. This was going to be something more, something life-altering. "You've been on my mind," Elon said after a long silence, his eyes searching hers for any sign of understanding. "Ever since I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I missed, something important." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean? What could you have missed?" He shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping nervously on the cup. "It's hard to explain. You were different from everyone else. The way you talked, the way you saw things, it's not something I come across often." He paused, and for a moment, Sarah thought he was going to say something more, but the words seemed to get caught in his throat. "Look," he continued, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. "I'm not one to get personal, but I've been struggling, Sarah, with everything. My companies, my life, the constant pressure to be something bigger than I am. I know what it looks like from the outside, but inside, it's chaos. I don't know who I am anymore. And the truth is, I don't know if I'm even good at what I do anymore." The confession hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. She had always seen Elon as this larger-than-life figure, someone who could conquer anything, someone who had it all figured out. But hearing him speak like this, vulnerable, unsure, made her realize how much they had in common. They were both struggling, both lost in their own ways. "Are you saying that you need help?" she asked softly, unsure if she was hearing him right. Elon nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on his hands. "I guess that's what I'm saying. I need someone to remind me that I'm not alone in this. That maybe there's more to life than just building rockets or sending cars into space. I've lost touch with everything that really matters." Sarah's heart ached as she listened to him. She had never imagined that someone like Elon Musk would feel so lost, so disconnected. But in that moment, she understood. He was just like her, searching for something deeper, something real. For the first time, she realized that maybe her life wasn't as small and insignificant as she had once thought. Maybe, just maybe, she had something to offer. Not just to Elon, but to herself. She met his gaze, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You're not alone, Elon. We're all just trying to figure it out. We're all just doing the best we can. Maybe you need to stop trying to be everything and just be. Maybe you need to find what really makes you happy." Elon didn't respond immediately, but his eyes softened. The weight that had been hanging over him seemed to lift, if only for a moment. And in that moment, Sarah knew that this was the beginning of something new, something bigger than either of them had anticipated. The diner was quieter than usual when Sarah closed up that evening, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above blending with the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall. Her thoughts were still wrapped around her conversation with Elon Musk earlier that afternoon. She had never imagined in her wildest dreams that the man who had seemed like a distant figure in the media would sit across from her in the diner and reveal his struggles. Her heart still felt heavy, but in a way that made her feel more alive. The connection between them, however brief, had left a mark on her, a reminder that even the most powerful people could feel lost, vulnerable, and human. The world she had once felt so detached from, the world beyond the diner and the small town she had grown up in, now felt closer. She hadn't realized how much she had craved something more until Elon had spoken his truth. He had opened a door for her, a door she hadn't known existed. And now, she stood on the threshold, staring into the unknown, wondering if she could walk through it. Sarah sighed, wiping down the counter with a rag as she tried to put her thoughts in order. There was no denying that the conversation with Elon had stirred something inside her. It wasn't just about him. It was about her own life, her own choices, and the things she had put off for so long. The dreams she had buried beneath the weight of her responsibilities. As Sarah locked up the diner and stepped outside into the crisp night air, she felt the chill of the evening but also a strange sense of warmth. She couldn't explain it, but there was a feeling that she had crossed some invisible line in her life. The person she had been, quiet, reserved, caught in the routine of serving coffee and cleaning tables, felt like someone else now. For the first time, she felt the pull of something more. The stars were bright above, and Sarah took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. She had spent so long being afraid of change, of stepping into the unknown, but she couldn't ignore the shift within herself anymore. She couldn't continue to live in the past, clinging to the version of herself that had given up on her dreams. She was ready for more, ready to find out who she really was beyond the diner and the small-town life that had kept her in its grasp. As Sarah walked home, she reflected on her past, on the years she had spent trying to keep everything together, trying to maintain control. It had been safe that way, and in a way, it had been easier. But safety and ease had never led to anything extraordinary. And as she thought about Elon's words, about finding joy beyond the expectations of the world, she realized that it was time for her to do the same. When she got to her apartment, Sarah sat down at the small kitchen table, pulling out a piece of paper and a pen. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to accomplish, but she felt the urge to write something, to put her thoughts down on paper, to make them real. It was a list, an outline of sorts, a plan. 1. Get out of the diner. The first step had to be to leave the safe bubble she had created for herself. She had to step out and take a risk, no matter how terrifying that seemed. 2. Revisit her dreams. It had been years since she had thought about her passions, her hopes, the things she had once wanted to do. It was time to rekindle those sparks of creativity and curiosity. 3. Find a mentor. Just as Elon had confided in her, Sarah realized that having someone to guide her was essential. She would need to find someone who could help her figure out what came next, someone who had already walked the path she wanted to take. 4. Start small. Change didn't have to be drastic or immediate. She could start small, with manageable steps. It could be a new job, taking a class, or simply finding the courage to be open to new opportunities. 5. Embrace the unknown. The most important lesson she had learned from her encounter with Elon was that uncertainty was a part of life. She didn't have to have everything figured out to move forward. The only way out was through. As she read over her list, a sense of calm washed over her. It wasn't a plan for immediate success or instant happiness. It was a plan for change, for growth, for taking the next step toward the person she wanted to become. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. The following morning, Sarah woke up earlier than usual, feeling more energized than she had in years. The sun had barely risen, but she was already getting ready to face the day. She could hear the sounds of the town waking up around her, cars passing by, dogs barking, people beginning their routines. But today, everything felt different. Today, she was taking control. Today, she would step out of her comfort zone. When she walked into the diner, she felt a sense of anticipation in the air. It was just another day, yet it felt full of possibility. She moved with purpose, her mind already on the list she had written the night before. As the morning rush began, Sarah couldn't help but notice how different it felt to be in the diner now. She had always done her job well, but today, she did it with a renewed sense of energy. She was no longer hiding behind the counter, afraid of what lay beyond the diner's walls. She was ready to face the world, ready to live the life she had put off for so long. Around midday, as Sarah was wiping down a table, the doorbell jingled, and a familiar face stepped into the diner. It wasn't Elon this time, but Jake, the mechanic. He was smiling, a warm grin spreading across his face as he walked toward the counter. "Looks like someone's got a new spark today," Jake said with a wink. Sarah smiled back, her heart lighter than it had been in ages. You could say that. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she was ready to face it. She didn't need to have all the answers right now. The journey, she realized, was just beginning, and that was enough. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of small but significant changes. Sarah began her days with a renewed sense of purpose, waking up earlier, planning her steps carefully, and making choices that pushed her outside her comfort zone. It wasn't always easy. Old habits died hard, and there were days when doubt crept in, threatening to pull her back into the familiar, safe routine of the diner. But every morning, she reminded herself that she was capable of more than just this. She started taking online courses in areas she had always been interested in, like design and entrepreneurship. It wasn't a grand leap, but it was enough. Sarah joined a local networking group for small business owners, something she had been hesitant to do in the past. She'd even begun writing down her thoughts, journaling about the things she wanted to accomplish, the fears she had, and the hopes that now seemed possible. The most unexpected part of all of this was how much she had changed. At first, she had thought that getting away from the diner was the key to her happiness, but what she found was that it wasn't about escaping. It was about stepping into a new version of herself, one that was capable of handling whatever life threw at her. Then, one rainy Tuesday morning, as Sarah was getting ready for the day, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. "Hey Sarah, it's Elon. I know this might seem out of the blue, but I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I wanted to check in. Would you be open to meeting up again? Maybe this time, I'll be the one who listens." Sarah stared at the message for a moment, her heart racing. Elon Musk, the same man who had wandered into her diner months ago, who had been lost and unsure about his place in the world, who had shared a vulnerable side of himself. And now, here he was, reaching out to her. She hadn't expected this at all, but as she stared at the screen, Sarah realized that it wasn't just about Elon anymore. It was about her. It was about the choices she had made, the changes she had started, and the way she had finally opened herself up to something bigger. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't the same person who had sat across from Elon in the diner months ago. She had grown, and she was ready for whatever this next step held. With a quick tap of her fingers, Sarah responded. "Sure, Elon. I think it would be good to talk again. How about Thursday at noon? I'll be at the diner, as usual." She hit send and sat back, a small smile playing on her lips. She didn't know what this meeting would bring. Maybe it would be just another conversation, a chance to catch up on life. Or maybe, just maybe, it would be the start of something even more unexpected. She couldn't help but feel a little giddy. She had taken so many steps to get to this point. The future was wide open, and Sarah was beginning to see that it wasn't just about what she had left behind. It was about what she was moving toward. Later that week, when Elon arrived at the diner, it was as if the world had tilted on its axis once again. He was different now, too. Less the billionaire mogul who commanded boardrooms, and more like someone who had come to terms with the fact that he didn't have to be perfect. His smile was genuine, but there was a humility to him now that hadn't been there before. He slid into the booth across from Sarah and ordered a cup of coffee without any fanfare, as if they were just two people having a simple conversation. And in a way, that was all it was. Just two people who had been searching for answers and found a piece of them in each other. For the next hour, they talked. They talked about everything and nothing. Elon shared some of the lessons he had learned during his time away from the spotlight, and Sarah shared her own journey, the steps she had taken toward finding herself, toward creating a life that was meaningful to her. It wasn't about their past anymore. It was about the future. It was about moving forward. When the conversation finally slowed, and they both leaned back in their seats, Sarah realized that something had changed between them, but not in the way she had expected. There were no grand revelations, no dramatic life shifts. It was simply an acknowledgement that they were both on different paths now, paths that, for the moment, intersected in this small diner, with a cup of coffee between them. "I'm glad we did this," Elon said softly, his eyes meeting hers. "I think we both needed this. Not just for the answers, but for the connection." Sarah nodded, feeling the same warmth spreading through her. It was the kind of connection she had always wanted, to feel heard, understood, and not so alone in the world. Elon had been right when he said they were both searching for something. And maybe, In that search, they had found a piece of it in each other. As they said their goodbyes and Elon stepped back into the cold Minnesota air, Sarah watched him disappear down the street. There was no dramatic goodbye, no promises of a future that they couldn't be sure of. But there didn't need to be. Sarah knew that this chapter of her life, this unexpected meeting, this connection with a man she had never imagined could change her life, was just the beginning. She looked around the diner, at the familiar faces of her customers, the warm glow of the neon sign outside, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely at peace. It wasn't about fame, success, or wealth. It wasn't about living someone else's dream. It was about living her own. And Sarah knew now that, whatever came next, she was ready for it. Ready for the next chapter of her journey, whatever form it might take. Sarah sat in the back corner of the diner, sipping on a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, trying to focus on the upcoming day's tasks. The warm, familiar hum of the diner, its clattering dishes, the chatter of regulars, usually grounded her, but today, it only made her feel more restless. Her mind kept drifting back to Elon's words, to the idea of a partnership with him, and the potential of something much bigger than what she had ever imagined for herself. Elon's interest in her idea had been genuine, but now, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, something that could change everything for her. She'd never expected it. When he first walked into the diner, she had just thought of him as another eccentric customer, but now, it seemed like he was offering her a chance at something more. Elon had been intrigued by her proposal. Her idea of revitalizing small-town America by using the power of tech and innovation, something that could help people like the ones who came into her diner every day. He told her, without hesitation, that it had potential. The words felt like a spark, igniting something inside her that had long been dormant. She had never considered the possibility of being part of something so grand. But now, the idea of leaving the diner, leaving everything she had known, felt both thrilling and terrifying at the same time. "Sarah, are you even listening?" Chuck's voice pulled her from her thoughts, sharp and a little annoyed. She glanced up, startled to find her boss standing in front of her, arms crossed. His usual gruff demeanor seemed more pronounced than usual. She hadn't meant to ignore him, but her mind had been elsewhere, torn between two worlds. "Yeah, sorry," she said, trying to focus. "Just thinking about the day ahead." Chuck didn't seem convinced. He had always been a man of few words, and when he did speak, it usually carried a weight that demanded attention. Today, though, there was something more to his tone, something colder. "I need you focused, Sarah," he said, his voice low but firm. "We're a small operation here. You've got to keep your head down and stay sharp. You can't go dreaming about things that don't belong here. Not when we've got this place to run." Sarah felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly followed by an uncomfortable awareness. She had always done what Chuck asked, stayed in her lane, kept the diner running smoothly. But something about the way he said it today made her question herself. Was she really just supposed to settle for this? Was this all there was for her? Chuck didn't seem to notice the shift in Sarah's expression. He continued, "And you better keep it that way. We're not in the business of chasing pipe dreams." Sarah bit her lip. She had always respected Chuck, but his narrow view of the world was starting to feel more and more stifling. And that view seemed to be expanding to include her and her growing connection with Elon. She had always trusted Chuck, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't let him dictate her future. Not anymore. As the day went on, Sarah felt a deepening conflict gnawing at her. She hadn't meant to grow closer to Elon or entertain the thought of a life beyond the diner, but it was happening. She couldn't deny it anymore. But how could she even consider walking away from everything she'd worked for, especially when it meant disappointing Chuck? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime of the diner's door, and she looked up to see Elon stepping inside. It was still surreal to her that this man, who had once seemed like an unreachable figure from another world, was now someone who might play a significant part in her life. Elon caught her eye and smiled, walking over to the counter where she stood. He seemed just as at ease as he had the last time they met, his presence calm and unassuming, but Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. Was this really the right path for her? Was she betraying her old life, her old relationships, in the pursuit of something new? Morning, Sarah. Elon greeted her casually. Hey, Elon, she said, her voice sounding a little too tight, even to her own ears. I've been thinking about our conversation, Elon said, lowering his voice just a little. Your idea for helping small towns. There's something there. I think we could make a real impact. I want to help you bring it to life. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when she could take a step towards something bigger. But just as quickly, the weight of Chuck's words settled back into her mind. I appreciate it, Elon, really, but I don't know. There's a lot at stake here. The diner, Chuck. Elon raised a hand, stopping her. I get it, Sarah, but I'm not asking you to throw everything away. Just consider the possibilities. You've got something that could make a real difference, and I want to help you do it. The words hung in the air, full of promise and potential, but also full of uncertainty. Sarah knew she couldn't ignore this opportunity forever. She had already been feeling the stirrings of something more, something beyond the confines of the diner. But what would that mean for Chuck? For everything she had built here? Her eyes met Elon's, and for the first time in a long time, she saw a path laid out before her. A path she could choose to walk if she dared. But the path wasn't just hers to walk. It was a path that would have consequences for everyone involved. Thanks, Elon, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'll think about it. As Elon took a seat at the counter, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't fully understand. The conflict inside her only deepened. She had always been loyal, always been the steady one. But was that enough anymore? Could she walk away from her past to build a new future? Or was the cost too great? And as the day wore on, Sarah found herself more torn than ever. The diner, Chuck, her loyalty, it all seemed to be slipping away, piece by piece. She had to make a choice, but the question was, what would that choice cost her? The days following Elon's visit to the diner seemed to drag on endlessly for Sarah. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation they'd had, the possibilities Elon had opened up for her, the future that could be waiting just beyond the diner's familiar walls. But the more she thought about it, the more conflicted she felt. The idea of leaving the diner, of walking away from Chuck and her steady life, seemed both exciting and terrifying. That afternoon, as she was wiping down a table near the window, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah, we need to talk, Chuck said, his tone more serious than usual. He wasn't angry, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. Sure, Chuck, Sarah replied, setting down the rag and walking toward him. The weight of the conversation she knew was coming already pressed down on her. Chuck led her to the back office, where the smell of old coffee and grease clung to the air. He didn't offer her a seat, instead standing with his arms crossed, his gaze focused on the floor. Is everything okay, Chuck? Sarah asked, unsure of what to expect. He sighed deeply, finally meeting her eyes. I've been hearing things, he said, about you and Musk, about these ideas you've been discussing. And I gotta tell you, I'm not sure what's going on in your head, but I don't like it. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it aloud felt like a punch to the gut. Chuck, it's just an idea, she began, trying to keep her voice steady. It's nothing serious. Chuck shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. It's not just an idea, Sarah. You're talking about working with a guy like Elon Musk, a guy who doesn't know anything about this diner, this community. You think he's going to give a damn about us? About you? Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Chuck cut her off. I'm not some fool, Sarah, he continued, his voice rising now. I know what this is. You're trying to escape, to run away from here and chase some crazy dream. And if you think you can just up and leave this place, leave me and the diner behind, you're wrong. You've got a job here, a responsibility. His words hit Sarah hard. She had never thought of Chuck as anything but a friend and mentor, but now it felt like he was pushing her into a corner, forcing her to choose between him and the dream she had barely allowed herself to imagine. I'm not running away, Chuck, Sarah said quietly, her voice soft but firm. I'm just thinking about what's next, about what else is out there. and I can't ignore that anymore. Chuck didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned away, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Sarah knew he was struggling with this. He'd always been a creature of habit, a man who valued loyalty above all else. The idea of Sarah stepping out on her own, chasing something bigger than the diner, was foreign to him. Finally, Chuck spoke, his voice quieter now but still heavy with tension. "You want to leave, huh? For a guy like him?" He turned back to face Sarah, his expression unreadable. "Is that what this is about? You think he's got something better to offer?" Sarah swallowed, trying to steady herself. The emotions swirling inside her made it hard to think clearly. "I don't know, Chuck. I don't know what it is. But I feel like there's more for me out there. More than this." Chuck sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You think he's going to give you the life you want? You think he even cares about you?" Sarah flinched at the accusation, but she held her ground. "I think he sees something in me. Something worth believing in. I've never had anyone believe in me like that before." For a moment, the two of them just stood there, the silence stretching between them like an impassable divide. Chuck's face was hard to read. Angry, frustrated, maybe even a little hurt. But Sarah couldn't let herself be paralyzed by that anymore. She had to make a choice, and she knew it had to be her choice, not Chuck's. "I'm sorry, Chuck," Sarah said finally, her voice breaking the silence. "But I need to take this chance. I need to see where it could lead. I can't keep wondering what if forever." Chuck's eyes darkened, and for a split second, Sarah thought he might lash out. But instead, he just shook his head, a bitter smile curling at the corners of his lips. "Fine," he said, his voice tight. "You want to leave? Go ahead. But don't think you can just waltz back in here when it doesn't work out." The words stung, but Sarah didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She could feel the finality of the moment settling in, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Later that evening, as Sarah walked home, her mind was racing. The conversation with Chuck had been brutal, but in a strange way, it had also cleared the air. She was no longer stuck in the middle of a decision she had been too afraid to make. She had made it. The path forward was uncertain, but it was her path, and that was all that mattered now. When she got home, Maggie was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. Sarah dropped her keys onto the coffee table with a soft clink, and Maggie looked up, her eyes full of concern. "How did it go?" Maggie asked, her voice gentle. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. I told Chuck I'm leaving." Maggie didn't say anything at first. She just studied Sarah's face, reading the storm of emotions there. Finally, she spoke, her tone warm and understanding. "And how do you feel?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision still heavy in her chest. "I feel scared, but also like it's the right thing. Like it's time." Maggie smiled softly and patted the spot next to her on the couch. "Then it's the right thing. You're doing something for you, Sarah, and that's all that matters." The next few days were a blur of uncertainty and excitement. Sarah's heart raced as she awaited Elon's official response to her proposal. She had taken the leap, confronted Chuck, and chosen to pursue her dreams. Now, everything hinged on whether Elon would truly see her potential. The air was thick with anticipation. One afternoon, as Sarah was closing up the diner after the lunch rush, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be him? With trembling hands, she answered. "Hello?" "Sarah, it's Elon," came the familiar voice on the other end of the line. "I've been reviewing your proposal, and I have to say, I'm impressed. I think there's a lot of potential in what you're suggesting. I'd like to offer you a spot on my team for a new initiative we're launching." For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. The words felt surreal, as though she were in a dream. "Really?" she managed to say, her voice cracking. "Absolutely," Elon replied. "This is a project aimed at revitalizing small towns like the one you're from. I think your experience and ideas could bring a fresh perspective. We're starting a new team, and I'd love for you to join us." Sarah could hardly believe it. Her dreams were suddenly within reach, but as she looked around the diner, she couldn't ignore the sharp pang in her chest. She had made her decision to leave Chuck and the diner, but the reality of it all was starting to settle in. This wasn't just a dream anymore. It was real, and it was happening. "Thank you, Elon," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm honored. I'll need some time to think about the details, but I'm definitely in." "Take your time," Elon said warmly. "I'm looking forward to working with you, Sarah. I'll send over the official details shortly." As the call ended, Sarah stood there in the dimly lit diner, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had always dreamed of something bigger, but now that it was here, it felt terrifying. The next morning, Sarah walked into the diner to find Chuck already there, his face tight with anger. He didn't say anything when she entered, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Chuck," Sarah began, trying to keep her voice steady, "I got an offer from Elon Musk." Chuck didn't look up. His hands gripped the edge of the counter so tightly that his knuckles were white. "I figured you'd say that," he muttered, not looking at her. "I'm leaving Chuck," Sarah continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I've made my decision. I'm going to join Elon's team." The silence between them felt like an eternity. Finally, Chuck looked up, his eyes filled with hurt and anger. "So that's it then? You're just going to leave everything behind? After everything I've done for you? After all we've built here?" Sarah felt a stab of guilt, but she had made her decision. "Chuck, I can't stay here forever. I need to take this opportunity. I need to see what's out there, to build something of my own." Chuck shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "You think you can just walk away from all of this? From me? From the diner? You think Elon's going to take care of you like I have?" The bitterness in Chuck's voice cut deeper than Sarah had expected. "This isn't about you, Chuck. It's about me. About my future," she said softly. "I'm not running away from you. I'm just trying to follow my own path." Chuck didn't say anything else. He just stared at her for a long, tense moment. Finally, he spoke again, his voice cold. "Fine. If that's how it's gonna be, then don't come back. I'm not running a charity here." The words stung, but Sarah held her ground. "I'll clean up. I won't leave you high and dry." Chuck gave a sharp nod but didn't speak. Sarah walked to the back, feeling the weight of her decision crashing over her. She wasn't just leaving the diner behind. She was leaving behind a piece of her past, a piece of the life she had built. That evening, after a quiet and tense dinner with Maggie, Sarah sat down with her phone in hand, staring at the email Elon had sent her. She had agreed to join his team, but now the details were all laid out in front of her. A new city, new challenges, a new life. Everything was changing. She wasn't sure if she was ready for all of it, but deep down, she knew she had made the right choice. Maggie had been nothing but supportive throughout this process, but even she seemed to sense the weight of the decision. "So, what's next?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. "I'm leaving, Maggie," Sarah said softly. "I'm really going to do this." Maggie nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I know you are. You've got this, Sarah." But Sarah didn't feel sure. She didn't feel like she had it all figured out. The fear of the unknown still loomed over her, but she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, excitement, a sense of purpose. The next morning, Sarah met with Elon's team over video call, discussing the logistics of her move and her new role. It all seemed so fast, so overwhelming, but as the conversation wrapped up, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She was on the verge of something big. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Chuck. "Don't expect to come back here," the text read. "You're on your own now." Sarah swallowed hard as she read the message. A pang of guilt stabbed at her chest, but she couldn't let it hold her back. Chuck had made his choice. Now, it was time for Sarah to make hers. The decision was made. But now, standing in the quiet of her bedroom, Sarah couldn't escape the emotional storm raging inside her. She had told Chuck she was leaving. She had signed on to join Elon's team. But now that it was real, the weight of it all began to settle heavily on her chest. Sarah stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, and her mind felt like a jumble of conflicting emotions. Excitement, yes, there was that, but also guilt, doubt, and a strange sense of fear that she couldn't quite shake. She had worked at the diner for years, building relationships and a life that was familiar, comfortable even, and now she was walking away from it all. It was a constant tug-of-war inside her. She knew, deep down, that she had made the right choice. She had taken a leap, chosen her future. But could she really walk away from everything she had known? Later that afternoon, Sarah walked into the diner to meet Chuck one last time. The air was thick with tension as she entered. Chuck stood behind the counter, not looking at her, but wiping it down with exaggerated movements, the silence between them speaking volumes. "Chuck," Sarah said, her voice soft yet firm, "I've made my decision." Chuck didn't respond, but his stiff posture spoke volumes. Sarah took a deep breath and walked over to him. "You're really going through with this, aren't you?" Chuck's voice was rough, a mix of hurt and anger. He finally looked up at her, eyes dark and filled with frustration. "You're willing to throw away everything we've built for, what? A chance to be a part of Elon Musk's world." "Chuck, it's not about Elon. It's about me," Sarah replied, her voice wavering slightly. "I need to do this for myself. I need to see what else is out there. I can't stay here, stuck, just because it's comfortable." Chuck's eyes narrowed, and his lips tightened into a thin line. "Comfortable," he scoffed. "This diner is more than just comfort, Sarah. This is my life. And you're just going to walk away from all of it." "I'm not walking away from you, Chuck. I'm walking towards something else," Sarah said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I can't stay in the past forever. I need to grow." A long, painful silence filled the space between them. Sarah could feel the weight of Chuck's resentment pressing down on her, but she stood her ground. She knew, as hard as it was, that this was the right move. Finally, Chuck spoke again, his voice low and bitter. "Well, I guess that's it then. If you're leaving, you don't need to come back. I won't be waiting for you." His words stung, but Sarah had already made her peace. "Goodbye, Chuck," she said softly, turning toward the door. She hesitated for just a moment, but then stepped out into the crisp Minnesota air, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft click. For the next few days, Sarah's world was a blur of goodbyes and new beginnings. She packed up her life in the small apartment above the diner, sorting through her belongings and carefully considering what to take with her. The weight of each item she chose to keep felt symbolic. This was more than just physical packing. It was an emotional unpacking, a process of letting go of the life she had known. Maggie had been there for every step of it, offering both encouragement and a shoulder to lean on. "It's going to be hard, I know," Maggie had said as they sorted through boxes, "but you're making the right choice, Sarah. You've always been meant for more than this." "I hope so," Sarah replied, though doubt lingered in her voice. On her final night in Minnesota, Sarah sat on her bed, staring at the empty walls of her apartment. It was hard to believe that in just a few hours, she would be on her way to a new city, a new life. The uncertainty of it all weighed on her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to cry. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew it was time to move forward, no matter how scary it seemed. Maggie sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You're going to do great things, Sarah. Don't let fear stop you." The next morning, Sarah stood at the bus station, her suitcase beside her. The early morning sun glinted off the metal benches and the gray pavement, signaling the start of something new. As the bus pulled up, Sarah felt her heart race. The reality of leaving was setting in, but she knew it was what she had to do. Elon had already reached out to her again, giving her the final details of her new role. "You'll be working on a project that's bigger than anything you've ever done before," he had said, his voice confident. "You'll be helping small towns grow, helping people rediscover what's possible. This is your chance to be part of something truly impactful, Sarah." Her hands trembled as she thought about the enormity of the opportunity ahead. She could no longer pretend that this was just a fantasy. It was happening. She was leaving her old life behind. As the bus started moving, Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. She glanced out the window one last time, taking in the familiar sight of the diner fading into the distance. It was a chapter closing, but she was ready for what lay ahead. This was just the beginning. The bus rolled steadily along the highway, and with every mile, Sarah felt both the weight and the freedom of her decision. The familiar sights of Minnesota, the small towns she had known all her life, slowly faded into the distance, leaving her with a profound sense of finality. She had left everything behind, the diner, Chuck, and the life she had built in her hometown. But despite the sadness, she also felt a surge of excitement and possibility. The unknown had always been intimidating, but now it felt more like an open door, waiting to be walked through. She arrived in the city later that evening, her heart pounding in her chest. Elon's team had arranged for her to stay in a small, comfortable apartment near their headquarters, a far cry from the modest apartment she had left behind in Minnesota. The city was bustling, lights, people, and the constant hum of life. It was overwhelming at first, but the energy was contagious. This was it. This was the start of her new life. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, introductions, and settling into her new routine. Elon greeted her personally, and there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. She was no longer just a waitress in a small-town diner. She was part of something bigger. Elon's enthusiasm was contagious, and he made sure Sarah felt welcome and important from the very beginning. "You're here for a reason, Sarah," Elon told her during their first one-on-one meeting. "You've got vision, and that's what this project needs. We're about to change things in small towns across America. This is your chance to be a part of something that matters." Sarah nodded, still in awe of the opportunity. "I'm ready," she said, though there was a lingering nervousness in her voice. She had always been the underdog, and now she had to prove that she belonged. This was her moment, but it was also a test. Her first project was with a team tasked with studying the economic potential of small towns across the Midwest. It was a project that would require her to tap into her creativity and think outside the box. But more than that, it would test her ability to keep up in a fast-paced, high-pressure environment. As she sat in the team's meeting, listening to the discussions fly by about growth potential, digital solutions, and economic models, Sarah felt like she was drowning in unfamiliar terms and complex ideas. She had been a small-town girl her whole life, and this was a world that seemed light years away. But she had been chosen for this role because of something she knew instinctively: how to connect with people, how to understand what they truly needed. That was something no amount of corporate jargon could replace. One evening, after a particularly intense day at the office, Sarah found herself at a local cafe. She sat alone at a small table, watching the people around her. The city felt so different from Minnesota: larger, faster, more anonymous. She missed the quiet comfort of the diner, the familiarity of Chuck's gruff humor, and Maggie's calming presence. She felt isolated in a way she hadn't expected. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Maggie. "Maggie, how's it going, Sarah? I miss you. Have you found a place to eat yet? Don't let those city folks work you too hard. You're going to do great things." Sarah smiled as she read the message, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. Maggie had always known how to lift her spirits, even from miles away. It was moments like this that reminded Sarah why she had made the decision to leave. It wasn't just about leaving behind what she knew. It was about growing, challenging herself, and finding out what she was truly capable of. Still, Sarah couldn't deny the sense of loneliness that sometimes crept in. She had left behind the people who had always supported her, and now she was in a city full of strangers, with no clear path ahead. But then Sarah remembered something Elon had said during their first meeting. "Don't get lost in the noise of the world. Find your voice. Trust that you have something to offer." Taking a deep breath, Sarah sent a quick reply to Maggie. "Sarah, I miss you too. It's tough, but I know I'm doing the right thing. I'm finding my way, one step at a time." The next day, Sarah's resolve was tested again as she dove into her first major assignment: helping to design a community revitalization project for a town struggling with economic decline. The task was complex, involving collaboration with local officials, businesses, and residents to find sustainable solutions. It was the kind of project that required both big-picture thinking and an understanding of what small towns truly needed. And Sarah realized, with a surge of pride, that she was the right person for the job. As the weeks passed, Sarah's confidence began to grow. Her role evolved from a support position to one of leadership, and she found herself contributing ideas that were being recognized by the team. One idea, in particular, about using local resources and talents to boost the town's economy, was met with enthusiasm by Elon and his colleagues. "Great job, Sarah," Elon told her after their meeting. "This is the kind of thinking we need. You're starting to find your voice, and it's exactly what this project needs." For the first time since her arrival, Sarah allowed herself to feel proud. It was as if the pieces were finally falling into place. She was making a difference, and she was learning that the unknown wasn't as terrifying as she had once believed. Later that night, as Sarah sat in her apartment, looking out over the city, she reflected on her journey so far. She had come so far, but there was still a long road ahead. The fear that had once held her back was slowly being replaced by a growing sense of self-belief. She knew there would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but she also knew she was stronger than she had ever realized. This was just the beginning, and she was ready. Sarah sat at her new desk, a sleek, modern workstation in the heart of the bustling office space. The hum of conversation and the tapping of keyboards surrounded her, but she was in her own little world. This was where the ideas were born, the place where everything she had ever hoped for could finally come to life. And yet, as she glanced around, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. In many ways, it felt like a new beginning, and that feeling seemed to grow stronger every day. Elon's team was in full swing with their community revitalization project. They were working on several fronts: data analysis, brainstorming sessions, and town visits. Sarah was becoming more and more involved, and she could feel her confidence building with every step. She was starting to see the impact her ideas could have, and she was becoming more vocal, offering suggestions, and even taking charge of certain initiatives. But while she was finding her stride professionally, there was still a question she hadn't fully answered. She looked out the window at the city skyline, the lights twinkling in the distance. It was the future unfolding before her, and yet, there was a part of her that couldn't shake the question of what this all really meant for her. The day's work was winding down, and Sarah found herself walking out of the office with Elon. They had just wrapped up a meeting with local business owners, discussing strategies for economic development, and the conversation was still buzzing in her mind. "So, Sarah," Elon said, his voice casual but full of that familiar intensity, "you've really settled in here. How are you feeling about everything?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, glancing at the city streets ahead. "It's been a lot to take in, but I think I'm starting to get it. I feel like I'm really contributing to something that matters, something bigger than I ever imagined." Elon smiled, his approval evident. "I'm glad to hear that. You've got a unique perspective, Sarah. It's the kind of perspective we need. You're not just in this for the work, are you? You're here because you believe in the mission." She nodded. "I do. It's not just about the business. It's about changing lives, helping these towns, helping people get the opportunities they deserve." Elon regarded her thoughtfully. "That's the heart of it. The real challenge is keeping that belief alive when things get tough. And they will. This is a high-stakes game." Sarah smiled, her mind wandering back to the days when she had worked at the diner, when she had thought her life was as simple as serving food and keeping the peace. Now, it seemed like the stakes were always high. But the difference was, this time, she was ready. She wasn't just waiting for change to happen. She was making it happen. That evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Sarah sat on the balcony of her apartment, sipping a cup of coffee. She reflected on everything that had brought her here. The diner, Chuck, Maggie, the small town she had once thought would be her forever home. Her thoughts drifted to the life she had left behind, the relationships that had shaped her. Maggie's words echoed in her mind. "If you had the chance to change your life, would you take it? What's holding you back?" She realized that for a long time, she had been held back by fear, the fear of failure, the fear of leaving everything familiar behind. But now, as she looked out at the city, she understood that the fear hadn't gone away. It had just been replaced by something even stronger: hope. Hope that she could make a difference. Hope that this journey, this leap of faith, was exactly what she needed. The next day, Sarah found herself walking through a busy downtown street, her mind focused on the challenges ahead. There was still so much work to be done, so many obstacles to overcome, But she had come a long way from that nervous, unsure woman who had left the diner. She had found her voice. She had found her place. And now, as she passed by a storefront, she noticed a group of young people gathered around, laughing and talking. They looked so carefree, so full of life, and it hit her. She had once been in their shoes, full of dreams and possibilities, unsure of how to move forward. And now, she was walking down a path she had once thought was out of reach. The future was open to her, and it was her turn to shape it. Later that evening, after another productive day at the office, Sarah sat down to write a letter. It was a letter to Maggie, to update her on the latest developments, to share her excitement, and to reflect on her journey. Dear Maggie, I hope everything's going well back home. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day, and I wanted to share something with you. This whole experience, this move to the city, has been so much more than I ever expected. At first, I wasn't sure I'd make it. There were times when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I'd made the right choice. But now, I realized something. I had to take this step. I had to leave behind what was comfortable in order to find out who I really am, what I'm capable of. And I'm starting to see that I'm stronger than I thought. I still miss you, though. I miss the diner, the regulars, the simple life. But now, I see the bigger picture. This isn't just about me. It's about what we can all achieve when we push past our fears and follow our dreams. I'm excited to see where this takes me, and I can't wait to share more with you as things progress. Thanks for always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Love, Sarah. She sat back after finishing the letter, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't just about career success. It was about growth, self-discovery, and the courage to embrace the unknown. And as she stared at the letter on the table, she realized that this chapter of her life wasn't the final one. It was just the beginning. Sarah was getting the hang of things. The initial excitement of joining Elon's team had faded into a steady rhythm. But with that rhythm came new challenges, challenges that were pushing her to her limits in ways she hadn't expected. The pressure was mounting, and the pace of the work environment was faster than she had ever imagined. Elon had warned her. Things are about to get intense, he had said during their first meeting, but I'm confident you're up for it. At first, Sarah had brushed it off, thinking she was prepared for anything. But now, each day felt like a test, and sometimes she found herself struggling to keep up. Her desk was piled high with reports, data, and planning documents for the next phase of the revitalization project. As Sarah sifted through them, her mind wandered. She was determined to make a real impact, but it seemed like the harder she worked, the more she had to prove herself to the team. It wasn't just about doing her job well. It was about establishing herself as a credible, valuable member of the team. One morning, Sarah entered the office feeling more confident than usual. She had just wrapped up a project on sustainable business models that she knew would catch Elon's attention. But as she walked past the open offices, she overheard a conversation between two of Elon's senior team members. "I don't know. Something about her just doesn't sit right with me," one of them said. "I heard she was just a waitress before all this. I mean, can she really keep up with us?" The other responded, their voice dripping with skepticism. Sarah's heart sank. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had expected to face challenges, but this? It was different. The unspoken doubt from her colleagues, who were some of the best minds in the business, stung more than she cared to admit. She had left everything behind to prove herself, and now it felt like her past was still holding her back, even in the eyes of those who were supposed to support her. As the day wore on, the tension she felt from her colleagues was impossible to ignore. Every time Sarah entered a meeting, she could feel their eyes on her. Their whispers, the dismissive looks, they were subtle, but they were there. It wasn't overt hostility, but the doubt was palpable. It made her second-guess herself, made her question whether she truly belonged in this high-stakes environment. Elon, on the other hand, was as supportive as ever. He believed in her potential, and that was a lifeline. But even with his encouragement, the mounting pressure was taking its toll. That evening, after another long day, Sarah found herself on the phone with Maggie. It was one of the few things that felt normal to her these days. Talking to her best friend back in Minnesota, sharing her highs and lows. "It's tough, Maggie," Sarah admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. I thought I was ready for this, but every day I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. The team doesn't really seem to believe in me. It's like they think I'm out of my depth." Maggie's voice came through the phone with a comforting warmth. "Sarah, you're doing something most people wouldn't even dare to try. You've already made it this far. Just because some people can't see your value doesn't mean it's not there. You've got a strength that they can't measure. Trust yourself." Sarah smiled, feeling a small spark of confidence flicker inside her. "I know. I've just got to prove it to them." Maggie laughed softly. "And you will. You always do." The next morning, Sarah walked into the office with a renewed sense of purpose. She would not let doubt dictate her future. She had already come so far, and she wasn't about to let a few skeptics stand in her way. Elon had scheduled a brainstorming session that day, and it was her chance to show what she could do. She had a fresh idea about integrating data-driven strategies with the community projects they were working on, and she was determined to present it. When the meeting started, Sarah felt the eyes of her colleagues on her again. But this time, she didn't flinch. She stepped forward, cleared her throat, and began outlining her proposal with confidence. "Here's the thing," she said, her voice steady. "We're working with these small towns, trying to revitalize them. But if we don't have the right data backing our efforts, we risk missing key opportunities. My idea is to use predictive analytics to identify which areas in these towns have the most potential for growth. We can then tailor our strategies to these areas, ensuring that our resources are being used effectively." There was a long pause as the room processed what she had said. For a moment, Sarah feared she had overstepped. But then, Elon spoke up. "That's a really interesting approach," he said, nodding thoughtfully. "Using data to guide decision-making. I like it." A few other team members murmured their agreement, and Sarah felt a surge of relief. She had done it. She had earned their respect, at least for the moment. After the meeting, Elon pulled her aside. "That was excellent, Sarah. You really brought something fresh to the table today. Keep pushing yourself like that, and you'll show them exactly what you're made of." Her heart swelled with pride. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path, like all the hard work and sacrifice were finally paying off. As Sarah left the office that evening, the sky above was painted in hues of pink and orange, the kind of sunset that always made her feel like anything was possible. She was starting to realize that, in this new chapter of her life, she wasn't just working to prove herself to others. She was doing it for herself. She was here not just to show her team what she could do, but to prove to herself that she belonged at the table. The weeks following Sarah's breakthrough were a whirlwind. Her proposal had garnered the attention of Elon and the team, but the road to proving herself wasn't as simple as one good idea. The fast-paced nature of the work had only intensified, and with every new responsibility, the stakes seemed to grow higher. But amid all the pressure, Sarah was starting to find her footing. Each small victory, whether it was a successful pitch or a problem solved, built her confidence. She was no longer the outsider who had stumbled into a room full of experts. She was becoming an integral part of the team, and that was no small feat. Still, there were moments when Sarah couldn't shake the doubts. She'd look around the room at Elon's other team members, all of them seasoned professionals, and wonder if she truly belonged. The fear of being found out, of being exposed as an imposter, lingered just beneath the surface. One evening, after another long day, Sarah stayed late to finish a report she had been working on. The office had mostly emptied out, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint clinking of her keyboard the only sounds. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice Elon standing at the door until he spoke. "You're burning the midnight oil, huh?" Elon's voice was warm, but there was an edge of concern in it. Sarah looked up, startled, and smiled. "Just trying to catch up on some of the tasks I've been given. Things have been a bit overwhelming lately." Elon leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a moment. "I know the feeling, but don't work yourself to the point of exhaustion. You're doing great. Everyone can see it." Sarah hesitated. "I don't know. I feel like I'm just getting by sometimes. Like I'm not as good as they all think I am." Elon stepped into the room and sat down across from her. "I've been watching you, Sarah. You're tougher than you give yourself credit for. This isn't just about skills. It's about the way you approach challenges. You're quick on your feet, And you're always thinking about the bigger picture. That's exactly what this team needs. His words struck Sarah like a lifeline. In that moment, she realized that Elon wasn't just talking about the work. He was talking about her. The way she carried herself, the way she approached problems. It was a reassurance she had needed, but didn't know how to ask for. "You really think that?" she asked, her voice soft. "I do," Elon replied. "I know you're still finding your rhythm, but I want you to stop doubting yourself. You belong here." The sincerity in his voice made Sarah feel like she had just been handed permission to stop second-guessing herself. She had been so focused on proving her worth to others that she had forgotten to believe in herself. Elon's words were the spark she needed to shift her mindset. "Thanks, Elon," Sarah said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "I needed to hear that." "Anytime," he said, offering her a reassuring smile. "Just remember, you're not alone in this. I've got your back." The next day, Sarah walked into the office with a sense of confidence that surprised even her. She had always felt like the underdog, the one who had to work extra hard to be noticed. But today, she carried herself differently. The doubts had started to fade, replaced by a growing belief in her abilities. The team was preparing for a critical presentation to a potential partner, and Sarah had been asked to contribute some of her ideas. She had spent the night before refining her proposal, a plan to streamline the project's logistics using a more efficient model. She was excited, but also nervous. This was a big moment. If she nailed this, it would solidify her place on the team. When the meeting began, Elon introduced Sarah to the group. "This is Sarah's idea," he said, his voice full of pride. "She's been working hard to improve our processes, and I think you'll all be impressed with what she's come up with." Sarah took a deep breath and presented her proposal. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of the room's attention on her, but this time, she didn't shrink. She explained her strategy with clarity, each point building on the last. The team was quiet at first, absorbing the details. Then, one by one, they began nodding in agreement. "Impressive," one of the senior team members said. "This could really streamline operations and save us a lot of time and money." Elon smiled, his eyes meeting Sarah's. "I told you they'd like it." When the meeting ended, Elon pulled Sarah aside. "You crushed it today. I knew you had it in you." Sarah beamed, feeling the rush of accomplishment. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without your support. I'm just here to make sure you have what you need to succeed. You're the one doing the work," he said. That evening, as Sarah left the office, she couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't just the success of her proposal. It was the way she had felt during the presentation, how comfortable and confident she had been. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. And that, more than anything, was what had changed. It wasn't the idea that had impressed the team. It was Sarah herself. She had stopped doubting who she was, and in doing so, had earned the respect she had been fighting for. As she drove home, she thought about how far she had come. A few months ago, she was just a small-town waitress with a dream of something more. Now, she was a part of a groundbreaking project, working alongside some of the brightest minds in the country. It had taken time, but Sarah was finally starting to see that she wasn't just capable of succeeding. She was meant to be here. Sarah's newfound confidence was tested almost immediately. What had begun as a small idea, gaining traction within Elon's team, was rapidly growing into something much larger. As her contributions became more significant, the challenges also escalated. Sarah found herself thrust into situations where the stakes were higher and the pressure more intense. It started with a setback in Elon's project. Despite their best efforts, things weren't going as smoothly as expected. The project, designed to help small towns revitalize their economies, had hit a major roadblock. There were unforeseen logistical issues, a lack of buy-in from local governments, and a general sense of uncertainty about the direction they were heading. Elon called a meeting to discuss the situation, and Sarah found herself at the center of it all. She had a strong grasp on the project's details, but the problems seemed to keep piling up. "Sarah," Elon said, his voice calm but firm, "we need to fix this fast. What do you think the best course of action is?" It was the kind of question that used to paralyze Sarah, the weight of responsibility too much for her to bear. But now, she felt ready to tackle it. She stood tall, addressing the group. I believe the key to turning things around lies in focusing on the community engagement aspect. We've been top-down in our approach, and we need to involve the local leaders more directly. We should organize small-town summits, get input from local businesses, and ensure they feel ownership of the project. Her idea was met with nods of approval, and Sarah felt a rush of pride. For the first time, she wasn't just answering questions. She was providing solutions. It was a pivotal moment, but the satisfaction was fleeting. As the team worked to implement her suggestions, it quickly became clear that the stakes were higher than Sarah had anticipated. The local governments were skeptical, and many community leaders were resistant to change. Time was running out, and the pressure to succeed was mounting. In the midst of this, Sarah's personal life started to feel the strain. She had moved to the new city with high hopes of balancing work and her relationships, but the constant demands of the project left little time for anything else. Her friendship with Maggie, her closest confidant from the diner, was beginning to feel distant. Maggie had been supportive from the beginning, encouraging Sarah to take risks and pursue her dreams. But as Sarah got more immersed in her new life, she realized how much time she was losing with her old friend. They hadn't talked much in the last few weeks, and when they did, their conversations felt forced, like two people who were drifting apart. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, Sarah called Maggie. "Hey, it's been a while," Sarah said, trying to sound upbeat. "How have you been?" "I've been good, but I've been wondering about you." Maggie's voice was tinged with concern. "You've barely been in touch. Are you okay? You seem like you're drowning over there." Sarah hesitated. She had been so consumed with the project that she hadn't realized how much she was isolating herself. "I'm just really overwhelmed," she admitted. "I'm working non-stop and honestly, I'm scared I might mess everything up. This project is bigger than anything I've ever done, and sometimes I feel like I don't belong here. Like maybe I'm not cut out for this after all." Maggie's tone softened. "Sarah, I know you. You're more than capable. But don't forget about the people who've always had your back. I'm here for you, even if you can't always make time to chat. Don't push us away." The words hit Sarah hard. She had been so focused on proving herself to the people at work that she had neglected the relationships that mattered most. Maggie had always been there for her, yet she had let that connection slip. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly. "I've been so wrapped up in this new world that I haven't taken the time to be there for you." "You're right. I don't want to lose touch with you." Maggie paused before replying, her voice warm but firm. "You don't have to do this alone, Sarah. Just remember to breathe, okay?" The conversation with Maggie left Sarah with a lingering sense of guilt. She realized that in her pursuit of success, she had started to lose sight of the very things that had grounded her in the first place. Balancing work and personal life wasn't easy, and she had neglected to check in with herself and the people who truly cared. As the days wore on, the pressures of the project continued to build. Sarah was increasingly expected to take on leadership roles. The team was moving forward, but with each passing day, the complexity of the project grew. New challenges emerged, each more daunting than the last. One of the most significant tests came when a major funding partner backed out of the initiative. The loss of their support sent shockwaves through the team. Elon seemed unfazed, but Sarah could see the weight of it in his eyes. He was trying to keep the team motivated, but it was clear that morale was sinking. She was asked to lead a new round of negotiations with potential investors to replace the lost funding. The pressure was immense. Elon had always been confident in her, but this was a different level of responsibility. There was no room for error. But with that responsibility came something else, an unexpected opportunity. As Sarah stepped into the role of mediator and negotiator, she realized that she had grown stronger in ways she hadn't expected. She wasn't just a team player anymore. She was becoming a leader in her own right. The weight of leadership was heavier than Sarah ever imagined. The pressures of managing a large-scale project were taking their toll. As much as she tried to stay focused, the constant uncertainty was overwhelming. The team had just lost a major funding partner, and they were scrambling to secure new investors. Elon had put a lot of faith in her, and that was both an honor and a burden. It wasn't just her career on the line anymore. It was the future of an entire community that depended on the success of their project. One afternoon, the stakes grew even higher. During a tense strategy meeting, Sarah was informed that the window for securing funding was narrowing. A few of the investors had started pulling out due to the setbacks, and the remaining investors were demanding a more concrete vision. The pressure to turn things around immediately felt suffocating. If they didn't secure the funds by the end of the week, the project could collapse entirely. Elon turned to Sarah with a look that was both reassuring and challenging. "You're the one leading the negotiations, Sarah. You've got this. We all believe in you." His words echoed in her mind, but self-doubt crept in like a shadow. Was she really the right person for this job? Could she turn this around? What if she failed? There was so much riding on this, and she couldn't afford to let anyone down, especially Elon. The team was counting on her, but so were the townspeople who had placed their hopes in the project. She thought of all the small businesses that had been waiting for a chance to thrive. What if she couldn't deliver? What if all the hard work and sacrifices were for nothing? That night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, staring at the proposal drafts scattered across her desk. The hum of the city outside was almost deafening, but the silence inside her apartment felt even worse. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for her to make a decision that could change everything. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Maggie. "I'm just checking in. How are you holding up?" The simple message felt like a lifeline. She had been so consumed with the project that she hadn't had the chance to reach out to Maggie in days. Sarah quickly typed a response. "I'm struggling. I feel like everything's falling apart. The pressure is so much, and I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I'm afraid of letting everyone down." A few seconds passed before Maggie replied. "Sarah, I know it's tough right now, but look how far you've come. This is just a moment in time. You're strong enough to handle this. Don't let fear control you. You've always been able to find a way, even when things seemed impossible." Her heart lifted a little as she read Maggie's words. It was true. She had always pushed through difficult times before. Why was this any different? The stakes were higher, but that didn't mean she had to give in to fear. The only way out was through. Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. It was time to stop doubting herself. She had faced obstacles before and come out stronger on the other side. Now wasn't the time to crumble under pressure. She needed to believe in her abilities and trust that she was ready for this. The next morning, Sarah walked into the office with a renewed sense of determination. She was ready to face the investors. It wasn't just about saving the project. It was about proving to herself that she could lead. She gathered the team together for a final strategy session. "I know things look tough," Sarah began, her voice steady and confident. "But this is our chance to show everyone why this project matters. We're not just building something for today. We're building a future. We have the power to make a real difference, and I'm not backing down." The team rallied around her, their spirits lifted by her conviction. They knew that if Sarah believed in the project, they could find a way to make it happen. When the time came for the investor meetings, Sarah was ready. She walked into the room with her head held high, prepared to negotiate with everything she had. She pitched their vision, one that wasn't just about financial success, but about creating long-lasting change. She spoke passionately about the impact their project would have on the local communities and the businesses that relied on it. As the meeting drew to a close, one of the investors, a skeptical older man who had previously expressed doubts, spoke up. "You've made a compelling case, Sarah," he said. "I'm willing to reconsider my position. Let's talk numbers." Sarah felt a rush of relief, but she didn't let her guard down. There was still work to be done. The deal wasn't closed yet, but this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Later that evening, Sarah stood outside the building, the cool breeze brushing against her face. She had made it through one of the most difficult days of her career. The weight that had been pressing down on her for weeks seemed to lift, but there was still more to do. She wasn't out of the woods yet, but she had proven to herself that she could rise to the challenge. As she made her way home, her phone buzzed again. It was Maggie. "You did it, didn't you?" Sarah smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. "I'm not there yet, but we made progress. I'm starting to believe we can actually pull this off." Maggie's reply was simple but filled with warmth. "I knew you would. I'm so proud of you." Sarah stopped for a moment, staring up at the sky. The journey wasn't over, but in that moment, She felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had stepped into the unknown, faced her fears, and emerged stronger. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready for whatever came next. The days following the investor meeting were a blur of activity. Sarah felt like she was living in two worlds at once. On one hand, there was the relentless pace of the project, and on the other, there was a quiet realization within herself that something had changed. She wasn't just a part of this venture anymore. She was shaping it, leading it. Every decision she made rippled outward, influencing the future of the project and the people depending on it. The deal with the investors had gone through, and the project was back on track. But there was still so much work to be done. Elon had expressed his gratitude and confidence in Sarah, but that only made her feel more responsible. She couldn't afford to let anyone down. Not now, not ever. One morning, as Sarah walked into the office, she noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The team seemed more energized, more confident. It was like the win with the investors had sparked something within them. They were ready to get back to work, to push ahead with renewed vigor. It felt like they were on the verge of something incredible, and they were. As Sarah sat down at her desk, she reflected on how far she had come. Just a few months ago, she had been sitting in a small diner in Minnesota, wondering if there was more to life than serving coffee and flipping pancakes. The idea of leading a project like this, working with a team of brilliant, driven individuals, helping to build something that would change the fabric of small-town America, had felt like an impossible dream. Yet here she was, sitting at the heart of it, making decisions that would shape its success. Sarah looked over at the photos pinned to the bulletin board next to her desk. One photo in particular stood out. It was a picture of the diner, a place that had been her home for so long. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet the memories of that place were still vivid in her mind. Chuck's gruff voice, the clink of the coffee mugs, the warmth of the kitchen. Those were the moments that had formed her. They had shaped who she was, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. But she had changed. The diner, and the life she had there, were now part of her past. She had moved forward, and in doing so, she had found a new sense of purpose. It wasn't just about the project, the investors, or the accolades. It was about the journey. About proving to herself that she could do more, that she was capable of leading, and that the fear of failure could be overcome. Elon's words still echoed in her mind. "You've got this, Sarah." They had become a mantra for her. But more than that, it had become something she believed. She had learned to trust herself, to take risks, and to embrace the challenges that came her way. The fear of failure no longer held her back. In the following weeks, Sarah's role grew even more prominent. She was invited to meetings with local leaders, helping to forge new partnerships that would provide the resources necessary to bring their project to life. Each success, no matter how small, felt like a victory, not just for the project, but for her. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first stepped into Elon's world. She had found her place, not just in the team, but in her own life. There was still much to learn, of course. Every day brought new challenges, new obstacles, and moments of doubt. But Sarah was no longer the same person who had doubted herself in the beginning. She was stronger, more resilient. She had proven to herself that she could handle whatever came her way, and that realization had shifted something deep inside her. One evening, as Sarah was walking home from work, she received a text from Maggie. "I know it's been a crazy few weeks, but I'm so proud of you. You're exactly where you're meant to be." Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "Thanks, Maggie. I don't think I would have gotten here without your support. This is all new to me, but I'm starting to think I can handle it." The truth was, Sarah didn't know exactly where this journey would take her. She still had moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, she was comfortable with the uncertainty. She had learned to trust herself, and that was the most important lesson she could take away from all of this. As she passed by the diner one last time on her walk home, Sarah took a moment to look at the familiar sign. The memories of her time there flooded her mind, but they didn't feel like chains anymore. They were part of her story, part of her growth. The diner had been her starting point, but it was no longer where she was meant to be. The future was still ahead of her, and she was ready for whatever it held. As Sarah sat down at her desk the next morning, her mind wandered to the future. There was so much she still wanted to accomplish, So many more projects and ideas to bring to life. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. She had learned to embrace the unknown, and that made all the difference. The morning sunlight filtered through the large windows of the office, casting a warm glow over the bustling workspace. Sarah felt the energy in the room, renewed, fresh, and focused. The team was working diligently on finalizing the project's next steps, and everything seemed to be falling into place. For the first time since she had joined Elon's team, Sarah felt truly aligned with her work. There was a sense of purpose and clarity in everything they were doing. Sarah's desk had become a command center of sorts, with stacks of reports, project plans, and correspondence with various partners all neatly arranged. As she looked around at her colleagues, she noticed how the dynamics had shifted. Everyone seemed to trust one another more, to value each other's contributions. Elon's leadership, combined with her own growing confidence, had fostered an environment of collaboration. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Maggie. "Hey, how's everything going? How's it feel to be the boss?" Sarah chuckled softly. She didn't quite think of herself as the boss, but there was truth in Maggie's words. She had come a long way from being the waitress at the Minnesota diner, unsure of her place in the world. Now, she was sitting at the table with some of the brightest minds in the industry, making decisions that would impact small towns across the country. "I wouldn't call myself the boss just yet," Sarah typed back, "but I'm getting there. Feels pretty good, though. Definitely not the life I expected, but it's the one I'm making for myself." As she hit send, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, moments when she felt like she wasn't cut out for the challenges ahead. But those moments had made the victories feel even sweeter. She had learned not just how to lead, but how to be true to herself along the way. That afternoon, Elon invited Sarah to a meeting with the core leadership team. The discussion centered around scaling the project to new towns, expanding the initiative to even more communities in need of revitalization. Sarah was excited to be a part of this meeting, not only because it was a pivotal moment for the project, but because it was a sign of how far she had come. She wasn't just participating anymore. She was helping to drive the vision. The meeting was intense, filled with discussions about budgets, timelines, and potential roadblocks. But Sarah found herself speaking up more, offering ideas, and taking on more responsibility. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was a contributor, and her voice mattered. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon turned to Sarah with a smile. "Great input today, Sarah. I'm really impressed with how you're thinking about the next steps. Keep it up." Sarah smiled, feeling a swell of pride. It wasn't about the praise. It was about knowing that her ideas were valued, that her contribution was making a difference. After the meeting, as she was gathering her things, Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The weight of everything she had gone through, the uncertainty, the fear, and the hard work, it all seemed to come to a head in this moment. She had made it. She had proven to herself that she was capable of more than she ever thought possible. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling. She had always been the type of person who questioned her worth, who doubted if she was good enough. But now, as she stood in this office, this new world she had built for herself, she knew that she had earned her place. She wasn't just Elon Musk's employee. She was Sarah, a person who had grown, who had faced her fears, and who had made something of herself. Later that evening, after the office had quieted down, Sarah sat at her desk alone, reflecting on her journey. She had come so far, but there was still so much ahead. She was ready to face whatever challenges came next, because now she knew she could. As she looked out the window, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. This was her life now, and it was exactly where she was meant to be. Have you ever faced a moment where you realized how much you had grown? How did it change your perspective on what you were capable of? The next few weeks brought a new wave of energy and determination to the project. Sarah had settled into her leadership role, gaining confidence as she helped steer the team through the various stages of expansion. Elon was more than just a mentor now. He had become a trusted colleague, and Sarah felt like she was truly contributing to something that could change the lives of people across the country. Every day, the impact of their work felt more real, more tangible. But as is often the case with success, it wasn't long before a new conflict emerged. a challenge that would force Sarah to make difficult decisions once again. One morning, Sarah walked into the office to find a flurry of emails from Elon's team, alerting her to a rival project emerging in a nearby town. The initiative, led by an ambitious young entrepreneur named Brian Cole, aimed to revitalize small towns with a focus on technology and sustainable energy. The project was already making waves, drawing attention from local governments and media outlets, and it was gaining support in the same areas that Sarah and Elon's team had targeted. It didn't take long for Sarah to realize the stakes were high. If Cole's initiative gained momentum, it could steal the spotlight from Elon's project and threaten the community outreach they had worked so hard to build. The last thing they wanted was for their efforts to be overshadowed by a competing initiative. Sarah sat down with Elon to discuss the situation, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to be proactive," Elon said, his voice steady but intense. "We can't let this slip away. We need to outmaneuver them." As much as Sarah trusted Elon's instincts, she felt uneasy. It wasn't just about the competition. It was about what this rival project represented. For the first time since she had joined Elon's team, Sarah saw a mirror image of her own ambitions. Brian Cole, like her, was trying to make a difference, to create a lasting impact. But unlike Sarah, who had always balanced her ambition with a sense of ethical responsibility, Brian seemed willing to play dirty to get ahead. The more Sarah learned about Brian's methods, the more concerned she became. He was using aggressive marketing tactics, partnering with controversial investors, and making promises that seemed too good to be true. She couldn't help but feel that there was something off about his approach. Was he truly trying to help small towns, or was this just another business venture for personal gain? As the days passed, the tension between the two projects intensified. Sarah began to feel the weight of the decision she was being asked to make. Elon wanted to push back, to step up their efforts and use their resources to outdo Brian's project. But Sarah wasn't sure that was the right path. One afternoon, as Sarah sat at her desk, scrolling through more reports about the rival project, she was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Maggie, her old friend from the diner. "I knew I'd find you in here," Maggie said, stepping into the office with a friendly grin. "I brought lunch. You've been working too hard." Sarah smiled, grateful for the familiar face. "Thanks, Maggie. I've just been trying to figure out what to do about this new project in town." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "You mean the one with Brian Cole?" "That's the one," Sarah replied. "Elon wants to take them head-on. He thinks we can beat them with our resources, but I'm not so sure. Something about it doesn't sit right with me." Maggie leaned against the desk, thoughtful. "I get it. It's hard when you've worked so hard to create something meaningful, and then someone comes along trying to do the same thing, but in a way that feels wrong. But that's where you have a choice, Sarah. You don't have to play their game." Sarah looked up at her friend, a little surprised. "What do you mean?" "You've always been someone who's cared about doing things the right way. You don't have to lower your standards just to win. You can still make an impact, but you don't have to compromise your values. Maybe you need to find a way to take the high road." The words hung in the air as Sarah thought about them. Maggie was right. As much as Elon's push to outdo their competitors made sense from a business perspective, it wasn't aligned with what Sarah had learned to value. She wanted to make a real difference, not just be another player in a competitive race. That night, after a long day of meetings, Sarah found herself at the diner, sitting alone in the corner booth. She stared into her cup of coffee, the warmth of the mug contrasting with the storm of thoughts in her mind. Was she willing to sacrifice her values to win? Was there a way to stand by her principles without letting the competition defeat her? In that moment, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't fight fire with fire. Instead, she would focus on what made Elon's project different, the heart of the initiative, the genuine desire to help communities in a way that was sustainable, ethical, and responsible. There was power in doing the right thing, even if it didn't always lead to immediate success. The next morning, Sarah met with Elon to discuss her concerns. "I think we need to take a step back," she said, her voice firm but respectful. "We don't need to beat Brian at his own game. We need to show the world what we stand for, what we've always stood for. We have to prove that our approach is the better one, not by getting into a fight, but by doing what's right." Elon was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Then, he nodded. You're right, Sarah. I've been so focused on winning that I forgot why we started this in the first place. Let's find a way to do this on our terms. The tension between Sarah's project and Brian Cole's rival initiative continued to build. News outlets were buzzing about the competition, and rumors swirled about shady business dealings connected to Cole's operation. Despite her belief that doing the right thing would ultimately win the day, Sarah felt the weight of the situation grow heavier by the hour. Every time she logged into her email or checked social media, there were more articles comparing the two projects, more people asking if Elon's team could really outdo Cole's promises. And despite Elon's assurances, Sarah couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that something bigger was coming, something she couldn't predict. One evening, as Sarah stayed late at the office reviewing the latest reports, the door swung open. It was Elon, looking unusually tense. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by something far more urgent. "I've got news about Brian Cole. It's worse than we thought." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had been following the news about Cole's project, and the more she learned, the more it seemed like he was cutting corners. But nothing had prepared her for what Elon was about to tell her. "Brian's team has been playing dirty," Elon continued, his voice tight. "They've been leaking false information to the press, stirring up trouble with local governments to discredit us. And worst of all, it's starting to affect the people we've been trying to help." Sarah's mind reeled. She had suspected that Cole's project wasn't as clean as it seemed, but the full extent of the manipulation hit her hard. Elon's voice faltered, but his resolve was clear. He's using the same tactics he used in his previous ventures, buying influence, silencing dissent, and lying about the impact of his work. The media's picking up on it, and now they're turning on us. Sarah's stomach twisted. This wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. Brian Cole was manipulating the narrative in ways that could undo everything Elon and his team had worked for. It was like he had the power to control public perception, and if they didn't fight back, they could lose everything. Elon looked at her with frustration. "I want you to be ready. We need to step up our game. The good fight isn't going to be enough anymore. I need you to help lead us through this." But Sarah's heart wasn't in it. She had never been motivated by the fight itself. She had always believed that the work they were doing was what truly mattered, not the war they had to wage to defend it. She had tried to warn Elon about taking the high road, but now it seemed like the pressure was closing in on all sides. As Elon left the room, Sarah stood frozen in thought. She couldn't help but feel torn. On one hand, she had always believed in doing what was right, in treating people with honesty and integrity. On the other hand, the stakes were too high now. If they didn't fight back against Cole's dirty tactics, it could cost them everything. Everything they had worked for, everything they had promised the communities they were helping. Later that evening, Sarah sat at home, her mind racing. The phone buzzed on the table, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Maggie, who had been following the latest developments closely. The message was simple: "We need to talk." When they met up at the diner the next day, Maggie's face was tight with concern. "I saw the news, Sarah. This isn't just about business anymore. Brian's trying to turn everything against you, against all of us. What are you going to do?" Sarah sat across from Maggie, her fingers tapping restlessly on the table. "I don't know. I'm struggling, Maggie. Elon wants me to fight fire with fire, but I don't know if I can go down that road. What's the point of winning if we lose our soul in the process?" Maggie sighed deeply, her gaze softening. "I get it. But you know as well as I do that there are moments when doing the right thing doesn't always work. Sometimes, you have to stand up for yourself. Sometimes, you have to fight, even when you don't want to." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she thought about all the communities that depended on their initiative. It wasn't just about doing the right thing anymore. It was about making sure those people got the help they needed. But could she stand by her principles and still make a difference? That night, Sarah lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Everything felt so much bigger now. The stakes were no longer just about a small project in a few towns. They were about the very idea of what kind of person she wanted to be. Could she fight back without losing herself in the process? The next morning, after a restless night of thought, Sarah made up her mind. She wasn't going to let Brian Cole dictate the narrative, but she wasn't going to play by his rules either. She would confront the situation head-on, but on her own terms. She would tell the truth, expose the lies, and show the world that there was a better way to make a difference. When Sarah arrived at the office, she was determined. She called Elon into her office, her heart pounding as she prepared to take the reins. "Elon," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction, "I've thought it through. We can't let Brian control the narrative. We need to be transparent with the public, show them the truth about our work, and let our values speak for themselves. It's not about outsmarting him or playing his game. It's about proving that we're the ones doing the right thing." Elon looked at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You're right, Sarah. Let's do it your way." The days that followed Sarah's decision to expose the truth were a blur of press releases, media interviews, and community outreach efforts. Despite the whirlwind of activity, Sarah felt a growing sense of calm. She had made her choice, and now it was time to face the consequences. The strategy was simple yet powerful. They would tell the full story, both the successes and the challenges, and let the world see the true impact of their work. They reached out to journalists who had previously covered Brian Cole's project, offering transparency and revealing the discrepancies in the rival initiative's claims. The team also worked tirelessly to strengthen relationships with local governments, showing them how Elon's project was genuinely helping the towns that needed it most. It wasn't easy. The backlash from Cole's supporters was immediate and fierce. Social media was filled with accusations that Elon's team was merely trying to save face, and the media continued to paint Cole as the more authentic figure. But as Sarah had hoped, the truth eventually began to shine through. Elon was there every step of the way, encouraging Sarah as she took charge of the campaign. "You're doing the right thing," he told her one afternoon as they sat in his office, reviewing the latest articles. "It's not about winning the argument. It's about showing the world who we really are." The pressure didn't let up, but with every new story that was published, every new partnership they forged with local leaders, Sarah could feel the tide beginning to turn. The truth was spreading, and with it came a growing sense of trust in their initiative. It wasn't just the press that was changing, though. The more Sarah worked alongside Elon and his team, the more she felt herself growing. She wasn't just the outsider anymore, the one who had stumbled into this world by chance. She had become a leader in her own right, earning the respect of those around her. One afternoon, as Sarah sat with Elon in his office, reflecting on the progress they had made, she couldn't help but smile. "I can't believe how far we've come," she said, her voice filled with awe. "We were facing an almost impossible situation, and now I think we might actually be able to turn the tide." Elon nodded, a rare, genuine smile crossing his face. "You did it, Sarah. You stuck to your values, and it worked. I'm proud of you." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just the success of the project that mattered to her now. It was the fact that she had remained true to who she was, even when the pressure was unbearable. She had faced down the darkness, and in doing so, had proven that integrity could still win in a world that often seemed to reward the opposite. As the weeks went by, Elon's project continued to grow, and Sarah became an integral part of the team's success. The stories of the project's positive impact on small towns spread far and wide, and people began to take notice. Even in the face of constant attacks from Brian Cole's camp, the truth had a way of silencing the noise. One evening, as Sarah sat at her desk, going over the final reports for the project, Maggie called. "How's everything going?" she asked, her voice light. "Better than I ever expected," Sarah replied, leaning back in her chair. "I think we've turned the corner. I'm more confident now than I've ever been." "That's great to hear," Maggie said. "And how about you? How are you doing?" Sarah paused. She had been so focused on the project, so consumed with making sure everything went smoothly, that she hadn't taken a moment to really think about herself. I'm good, Maggie," she said, finally allowing herself to relax. "I feel like I've finally found my place. Not just in this project, but in my life. I'm doing something that matters, and I'm doing it on my own terms." "Sounds like you've come a long way," Maggie said, with a hint of pride in her voice. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. You've proven that staying true to your values is the most important thing. No matter what happens, you'll always have that." Sarah smiled, the weight of everything she had accomplished finally settling into her bones. She had proven to herself that success wasn't just about the outcome. It was about the journey, the choices, and the growth along the way. The phone call ended, and Sarah sat in the quiet of her office, reflecting on everything that had brought her here. The road had been long and full of unexpected turns, but she had come out stronger on the other side. She had chosen to fight for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against her. And in the end, it had made all the difference. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She knew that the journey wasn't over. There were still challenges to face, still lessons to learn, and still people who needed their help. But she was ready. Because now, more than ever, Sarah understood that the path forward was about staying true to who you are, no matter what the world tries to throw at you. As Sarah sat at her desk in the new office, watching the latest reports roll in, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. It had been months since she had left the diner, since that moment when everything seemed uncertain, and now she was living a life she had never imagined. Elon's initiative was thriving, and the small towns they had reached were flourishing in ways that no one had predicted. But even as everything around her seemed to be falling into place, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something left to resolve, something within her. The truth was, despite all the successes, the progress they had made, and the recognition she had earned, Sarah still carried with her the weight of those early doubts. She had walked away from her old life, her friends, her community, everything familiar, because she believed in something bigger. But as she looked out the window at the city skyline, she couldn't help but ask herself, was it worth it? Her phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Maggie. Maggie, hey, I saw the news. You've come a long way, huh? I'm so proud of you, Sarah. But you know, I still think about that diner sometimes. Remember when we used to dream about doing something more? You've done it. You made it happen. Sarah smiled at the message, a pang of nostalgia tugging at her heart. She and Maggie had spent countless hours talking about their dreams, about wanting something more than the routine of small-town life. But now, Sarah realized that her dreams hadn't been about escaping her past. They had been about making a real difference. She wasn't just working for success. She was working to create something meaningful. Still, Maggie's words had stirred something in her. Had she really embraced everything the world had to offer? Or had she been so focused on proving herself that she had forgotten to truly live? Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it was Elon's number flashing on the screen. Elon, hey Sarah, you're doing great, but I wanted to talk to you about something important. Let's catch up later this week. The message was brief, but Sarah could sense the gravity in Elon's tone. She had been so caught up in the chaos of the project that she hadn't stopped to think about the bigger picture. Maybe Elon had noticed something in her that she hadn't yet fully recognized. The weight of everything she had accomplished had settled on her shoulders, and in that moment, Sarah realized that the journey wasn't just about the external success. There was a deeper, more personal challenge she still had to face. As she sat with these thoughts, the door to her office opened, and one of her colleagues, Andrea, stepped in. Hey, Sarah, Andrea said with a smile, clearly excited about something. We're getting more press coverage today. Have you seen the latest article? It's amazing how far we've come. People are starting to notice. Sarah stood and walked over to Andrea's desk, glancing at the article on the screen. It was a glowing review of Elon's initiative, highlighting Sarah's leadership and the impact they were making on the small towns they served. The praise felt good, but something about it felt incomplete. She had accomplished so much, but what was it for? Sarah had worked tirelessly to prove herself, but now that she was here, she wasn't sure if the recognition was enough. She longed for something more than just external validation. She wanted to know that her work, her sacrifices, were truly making a difference. I see what you mean, Sarah replied, her voice soft. It's been incredible, hasn't it? Andrea nodded, clearly proud of what they had all achieved. Incredible doesn't even begin to describe it. You're really shaping the future here, Sarah. I mean, people are noticing how much you've grown. You've become such a strong leader. Sarah smiled but felt a subtle sense of unease. The praise was nice, but it didn't answer the questions that had been bubbling inside her for weeks. She was grateful for everything Elon's project had given her, but there was a deeper yearning within her that she hadn't fully addressed. As the conversation ended, Sarah retreated back into her office, her mind racing. She had come so far, but there were still so many things left to explore. She had chosen to leave the diner, to embrace the unknown, and now she had built something meaningful. But now, as she stood on the precipice of her future, Sarah realized that the most important question wasn't whether she had succeeded. It was what she wanted to do with her success. Was this the life she had imagined for herself? Or had she, in her quest to make a difference, lost touch with what really mattered to her? Sarah couldn't answer that question just yet, but she knew one thing for sure. The journey wasn't over. The room felt suffocating as Sarah stared at the report in front of her, the figures on the page swirling into an incomprehensible blur. It wasn't just another spreadsheet or set of numbers. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed. And it was slipping away. The team was facing a crisis, a major setback that threatened to undo all the progress they had made. A glitch in the project's technology, one that had seemed minor at first, had now escalated into something much bigger. It was a setback so significant that it could derail the entire initiative. Elon's reputation was on the line, and by extension, Sarah's as well. She ran a hand through her hair, trying to steady herself. The pressure was immense, far beyond anything she had faced before. This was the moment where everything could either fall apart or come together. She had known there would be challenges like this, but nothing could have prepared her for how intense this one would be. There were so many lives at stake, so many people who had invested so much in this project. Sarah, Elon's voice cut through the tension in the room. He stood by the door, his face serious, his usual calm demeanor now laced with an edge of frustration. We need to fix this and fast. This could be a game changer, and not in the way we want. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I know. I've been going over the numbers, but it's worse than we thought. The system's malfunction is affecting multiple towns, ones that are already struggling. If we don't fix this quickly, we could lose them. Elon paced back and forth, his mind clearly racing through the potential solutions. We don't have much time. If the media catches wind of this, it could take the whole initiative down. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. They had worked too hard for this moment, had made too many sacrifices to let it all crumble now. She glanced at her team, who were huddled around their laptops, trying to piece together a solution. But there was no quick fix. This was a technical issue that required innovation, but more than that, it demanded a leader who could pull everyone together and keep them focused on the goal. She took a deep breath, silencing the panic rising in her chest. She had faced bigger obstacles than this before. She had left the diner, risked everything for a new life, and had overcome countless challenges. She could handle this. What do we need to do? She asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. Elon looked at her, his expression a mixture of frustration and hope. We need a solution that's both immediate and long-term. Something that can get us back on track without sacrificing the quality of the service we're providing. You've got the experience working in small towns. You know what they need. We need you to step up and lead the charge on this. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Sarah. She knew they were looking to her, expecting her to find a way out of this mess. They were all counting on her, just as Elon had always believed in her ability to rise to the occasion. But the pressure was suffocating. She had never faced something quite like this before. She could feel her heart racing, the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. She thought back to all those late nights in the diner, the small-town community that had once seemed so far removed from this high-stakes world she now inhabited. But in a way, it was all connected. The people in those towns depended on this initiative to survive. And if she failed, it wouldn't just be her career on the line. It would be their future. Okay, Sarah said, standing up straighter. We're going to get through this. First, we need to isolate the root of the problem. I'll take a closer look at the system's weaknesses and get to work on a patch. But we also need to communicate with the towns. They're the ones who'll be most affected, and we need to reassure them that we're fixing this. If we lose their trust, we'll lose everything. Elon nodded, visibly relieved by her calm decision-making. Good. Let's move fast. The next few hours felt like a blur of activity. Sarah worked alongside her team, breaking down the problem step by step, communicating with the affected towns, and rallying the team to focus on the solution. The pressure was unrelenting, and there were moments when it felt like it might all collapse. But Sarah pushed through, refusing to let fear dictate the outcome. She knew what was at stake. At one point, Maggie called to check in, sensing the tension in Sarah's voice when she answered. "Sarah, I know this is big, but remember, this isn't the end. You've faced worse. You've built something from nothing. Don't lose sight of what you've already accomplished." Maggie's words hit Sarah like a wave of clarity. She had built this from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let it go down without a fight. It was late into the night when Sarah finally stood up, exhausted but triumphant. They had fixed the issue. The glitch was resolved. The affected towns were back online, and the media had been kept at bay. Elon's project was still on track, and the initiative would continue without a major setback. Sarah looked around at her team, who were all weary but relieved. The battle had been won, but there was still more to do. The project wasn't over. It was just beginning. "Great job, everyone," Sarah said, her voice tired but full of pride. "We pulled through together." As she left the office that night, Sarah stepped out into the cool night air, her thoughts swirling with the events of the day. She had faced the ultimate test, and she had passed. But what did this victory mean? Was it enough to validate all the sacrifices she had made? Or was the true victory in the journey itself? Sarah didn't have all the answers. But one thing was clear. She was ready for whatever came next. The morning after the crisis, Sarah sat in her new office, the weight of everything that had transpired settling in. The adrenaline rush from the night before had worn off, leaving behind a deep sense of exhaustion and a quiet satisfaction. The project was back on track, and Elon's initiative was moving forward. But as she looked out the window, watching the sunrise over the city, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within her. Success. It wasn't just about solving problems, hitting targets, or meeting deadlines. It wasn't even about winning. It was about how she had gotten here. The journey, the sacrifices, the lessons learned, and the people who had shaped her along the way. The lessons she had picked up along the way weren't always easy or pretty, but they were hers. A knock on the door broke her thoughts, and Elon walked in, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I heard you worked some magic last night. How are you feeling?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Surviving. You always seem to think I can do the impossible, and somehow it works." Elon grinned, taking a seat across from her. "You've earned your place here, Sarah. The project wouldn't be where it is without you. I can say that without hesitation." Her mind flashed to the past, her life in the diner, her quiet routines, the safety of the familiar. She had once thought that was all she needed. But now, looking back, she realized that she had outgrown that life. There had been so many doubts, so many moments when she had questioned herself, but with each challenge, she had grown. The woman who had walked into that diner was no longer the same one sitting here now. She had taken risks, had made hard choices, and had faced every setback with determination. Through it all, she had built something she was proud of, not just in terms of the project, but in who she had become. "I've learned a lot," Sarah said quietly, "about leadership, about making tough choices, and about trusting myself. And honestly, about what it really means to succeed." Elon leaned forward. "What does success mean to you, then?" Sarah paused, her thoughts drifting back to the late-night phone calls with Maggie, the moments of doubt, and the exhilarating feeling of overcoming obstacles. Success isn't just about the outcome. It's about the journey, the lessons, the people who help you get there, and the strength you discover when you push past your limits. It's about knowing you did everything you could and then some. Elon nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You've been through a lot to get to this point, but this is just the beginning. There are always more challenges ahead. The key is to keep growing with them." She smiled. He was right. There was no end point in sight, just more opportunities, more lessons to learn, more people to help along the way. The truth was, she wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead. But one thing she was certain of, she was no longer afraid to take the next step. She was ready for whatever came next, armed with everything she had learned so far. As Elon stood to leave, he paused at the door and turned back to her. "You're ready, Sarah. You've got this." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. For the first time in a long while, she felt sure of herself. Sarah leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought of the diner, the small-town life she had left behind. She thought of Chuck, Maggie, and the people who had supported her all along. She thought of Elon, who had given her the opportunity to prove herself, and the team who had rallied behind her when it mattered most. Her journey wasn't just about the destination. It was about the people she met along the way, the lessons she had learned, and the confidence she had gained. She realized that success, in its truest form, wasn't something that could be measured by numbers or accolades. It was about finding purpose, embracing change, and knowing that you had done everything you could to make a difference. It wasn't always easy, and it certainly hadn't been perfect. There had been setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt. But Sarah had learned to embrace those challenges, to see them not as roadblocks, but as stepping stones to something greater. She had learned to trust herself, to lead with integrity, and to never give up, no matter how difficult the journey might seem. As the day went on, Sarah began to draft plans for the next phase of the project, one that would take the initiative even further, involving more small towns, more communities, and more people who could benefit from the opportunities it offered. But it wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about building something that would make a lasting difference. And that, she realized, was the true measure of success. Success means different things to different people. For you, what is the true measure of success? Is it the destination or the journey?